What if the mightiest of the Noldor had reached across the air and taken it? What would the world look like in her keeping, preserved, perfected, and held still forever? And at what point does love for something become indistinguishable from the will to own it? Today on Tangwar Archives, we put our scholarship and our imagination into answering one of the legendarium's most consequential questions. What if Galadriel had taken the One Ring? The date is February 15, Third Age 3019. The location is a glade near Caras Galadon, within the golden borders of Lothlorien, where a silver basin sits on a pedestal of old stone and catches the cold light of a winter moon. The air carries the smell of deep roots and still water, and something beneath that, something older, which has no name in any language Frodo Baggins knows. It is the smell of a place that does not change. The grass beneath his feet is dry despite the season. The trees at the glade's edge stand perfectly still. Galadriel stands before him. She is taller than he remembers from the feasting hall. Or perhaps the open sky above the glade gives her proportions room to exist without walls to diminish them. Her hair catches the moonlight and holds it differently than it should, as though silver is simply the nearest available medium, and what her hair actually contains is something older than the moon itself. Something lit at a different source, in a world before the sun was made. Her eyes are on the ring. She has just spoken the words. The canonical speech, "I pass the test, I will diminish, and go into the west, and remain Galadriel," hangs in the cold air of the glade, dispersing slowly, the way smoke disperses when the fire beneath it has gone out. But Frodo is not watching her face when she speaks the words. He is watching her hand. Her left hand, raised palm outward as though bracing against some invisible tide, trembles once. A motion so small and so quickly suppressed that a less careful observer might have missed it entirely. Then it stills. And the stillness after the trembling is louder, in its way, than the trembling itself. 3,000 years of loss are contained in that stillness. The drowning of Beleriand, the ruin of Eregion, the slow withdrawal of every elven realm she has ever planted her hope in, taken by time and shadow and the long arithmetic of the world's diminishment. She has spoken the words. The test is past. And yet, the silence in the glade extends past where silence usually ends. A cold wind moves through the branches overhead and stills again. Somewhere beyond the Nimrodel, the river continues its old conversation with the stones of its bed, patient and indifferent to everything happening in this glade on this night. Then Galadriel reaches out her hand. She does not reach dramatically. There is no visible battle within herself, no grand moment of will overcoming will. The movement is quiet, the deliberateness of a woman who has not made this decision tonight, but has been making it in the accumulation of 10,000 nights before this one, and is simply now enacting what the long arithmetic of grief has already determined. Her fingers close around the ring before Frodo has fully understood that she has moved. The ring slides from his finger to hers with no resistance. It is warm. It fits perfectly. It was always going to fit perfectly. The first thing Galadriel notices is not power. It is silence. The sea longing, the ache toward the west that has been part of her since she first stood on the Telerin shore in Valinor and heard what waves sound like when the world is new and unmarred, goes quiet. Not healed, not answered. Simply quiet. The way a wound goes quiet when the surrounding flesh goes numb, and what replaces the pain is not health, but the absence of sensation. She does not understand this distinction yet. In the first seconds of wearing the ring, she experiences it as relief so complete it is indistinguishable from grace. Frodo, for his part, does not feel robbed. He feels the way a man feels who has been carrying a stone in his boot for so many miles that he has forgotten the stone is why he walks the way he does, and then removes the boot. And his foot meets the ground properly for the first time in months. The relief of it. The gratitude. He looks up at Galadriel and his eyes hold something uncomplicated and genuine and entirely wrong. He is grateful to her. He believes he has done the right thing. That is the first tragedy of this story. It will not be the last. Now the world answers. Lothlorien's eastern border, fixed since the age of Celebrimbor, held in its long circumference by the patient, circling power of Nenya, begins to move. Not rapidly. Not with the spectacle of flood or fire. It moves as a tide moves on a flat shore. The water advances and you do not notice until you look down and find your feet are already wet. The trees at the wood's margin begin to carry a light that is not moonlight. The grass beyond the Nimrodil turns silver-green in the winter darkness, as though the golden wood has simply decided to extend its autumn further into the world. On the Anduin, the boats of the sleeping fellowship rock once without wind, and are still. Inside her, the One Ring does not announce itself with noise. It arrives as clarity. Every leaf on every tree within the expanding borders registers to her senses with the specificity of a name she has always known. She perceives, without seeking, the weight of water in the soil beneath the Nimrodil's left bank. She knows the precise quality of light that will reach this glade in 4 hours when morning comes. The ring does not give her new senses. It removes every limit the world has placed on the senses she has always possessed. What she does not yet perceive, what will take her days to understand, is that Nenya has gone still. The ring of adamant has not broken. It has been absorbed. She thinks of this as the lesser ring resting within the greater, the way a smaller flame rests within a larger. She will come to understand it differently. Not tonight. She turns and looks east. Through the ring's reach, across the leagues of winter-dark Middle-earth, she perceives something she has seen before only in glimpses and in the protective silver of her mirror, the Eye of Sauron, moving toward her the way a lighthouse beam moves across open water, not choosing her, but finding her. Because she is now the largest fact in the darkness, and large facts draw attention. The eye sweeps east, sweeps north, and then it stops. It has found her. For one long moment, the length of a held breath, no more, Sauron's gaze and Galadriel's meet across the full width of Middle-earth. The channel between them is the ring itself, his work, his power, his long patience of centuries. Now on her finger, and turned back toward him like a lamp turned toward a man who stands in a room he thought was his alone. She does not shield herself. She does not retreat into the silver light that has kept her thoughts safe from his sight across the long centuries. She does not look away. She simply looks back. And the eye, which has not flinched from the last alliance standing on the slopes of Orodruin, which faced the White Council in Dol Guldur, and chose the timing of its own withdrawal like a man who leaves when he is ready, and not before, which has spent 3,000 years as the one thing in Middle-earth that everything else feared, flinches, in the glade near Caras Galadon. In the cold air that smells of old water and deep roots and things that do not rot, Galadriel Artanis, daughter of Finarfin, granddaughter of Fin, the last of the Calaquendi, the last elf in Middle-earth to have walked in Valinor when the trees still burned, lowers her hands slowly. She says nothing. She does not need to. Dawn in Caras Galadhon comes without announcement. The light does not break over the golden wood. It arrives as though it has always been here and merely consented to become visible. By the time the fellowship gathers on the lawn before the great tree platform where Galadriel receives them, the morning is already fully formed. Cold air, still branches, and a silence so complete it has texture. She has not slept. She has spent the hours between midnight and dawn in the high chamber of Caras Galadon, seated at the window that faces east, communing with the ring in the way a scholar communes with a text in a language they have always suspected they knew, following the grammar of it slowly, feeling the vocabulary yield, the long architecture of its meaning becoming available sentence by sentence. By the time the fellowship arrives below her, she has not yet mastered the ring. She has, however, begun to understand what mastery will feel like when it comes. That is enough for what must happen this morning. She descends to meet them. She has not changed her dress. She has not changed her face. What has changed is something the fellowship registers before they can name it. A difference in the quality of attention she brings to the air around her. The way the space near her has acquired a weight it did not carry yesterday. Aragorn notices it as a stillness at the back of his neck, the instinct that tells a ranger that the thing in the trees ahead is larger than expected. Legolas notices it in the light, the way it organizes itself around her. Less like illumination and more like deference. Boromir notices it last, and with the most difficulty, because what he notices is not a quality but an absence. The mild, incoherent anxiety he has carried since entering the Golden Wood 3 days ago is simply gone. He cannot find it when he reaches for it. He does not consider whether the removal of an anxiety should itself be cause for anxiety. She gives each of them what they need. This is the precise and careful language of the morning. Not what they want, not what they ask for, but what the ring's clear sight tells her they need. The thing at the architecture of each person that, if you press it gently in exactly the right direction, determines everything else. She begins with Frodo. She does not give him a physical gift. She gives him Instead, the thing that costs her nothing and is worth more than anything she owns, she honors him. She takes both his hands in hers and holds them, and she looks at him with the full weight of a gaze that has seen 3 ages of the world, and she tells him, quietly, without the theatrical resonance she could choose to bring to her voice but deliberately does not, that what he did in the glade last night was the bravest act she has witnessed in 3,000 years. Not the carrying of the ring, which any fool with enough stubbornness can do. The giving of it. The trust. She tells him that the world will not know his name for what he did here, and that it does not matter, and that she knows it, and that she will not forget it. Frodo's eyes fill. He does not speak. He nods once, and the nod contains everything. Relief and gratitude and the complicated warmth of a person who has been seen clearly and found, against all expectation, adequate. He does not notice that she has told him nothing about what happens next. He does not need next. Next is her concern now. Sam watches this exchange with a stillness that is not peace. His hands are at his sides, not crossed, not defensive, simply present. The posture of a man who is waiting to hear the sentence finished before he decides how to respond. She turns to him. She gives him the box of Lyran earth. Silver gray, cool in the palm, carrying the faint green smell of the wood at its deepest hour. She tells him that it carries the fertility of a country that does not age, and that when he brings it home, the Shire will bloom as it never has. She tells him this plainly, in the register of one gardener to another, with no particular ceremony. Sam's hands close around the box. The resistance in him, the private, carefully held sense that something here is not right. Which is not a political position, but a moral instinct as simple and sturdy as the man himself, flickers, does not go out, but flickers. He takes the box because his love for the Shire is not an abstraction. He can feel the weight of the earth inside it, and it smells like something real. He takes it and says, "Thank you, my lady," in the voice he uses when he means it fully. And underneath it he keeps the thought he has been keeping since last night, holds it carefully at the back of his mind where it will not show. He is wise enough to know that showing it would accomplish nothing. He is strong enough to keep it lit. Aragorn she does not give a gift. She gives him a vision. Through the ring's reach she shows him, not through the mirror, which presents futures as questions, but directly, with the ring's authoritative clarity, a Gondor that has not burned. The White City undimmed. Osgiliath not a ruin but a crossing, busy in the early morning with the ordinary commerce of a country at peace, merchants, children, the sound of a bell somewhere on the eastern bank. His people, whole, not the remnant of a war, but a people who do not carry war in the angle of their shoulders and the caution of their eyes. She shows him his kingdom as it could be, and she says nothing. She simply shows him. Aragorn is silent for a long time. Then, "And what would be required of me?" "To rule well," she says, "as you were made to." He holds her gaze. He is looking for the seam in it, the place where the offer becomes a trap, where the generosity reveals its cost. He is a son of Westerness, an heir to Isildur's long legacy of precisely this temptation, and he knows the shape of it. He looks for the seam and does not find one. "Then I am yours," he says, and bends his knee on the damp grass. And the heir of Elendil, kneeling in morning light before an elf queen with the ring of power, is one of the most natural-looking things that has ever happened. That is the most disquieting thing about it. Legolas she promises silence. The sea longing, the longing for Valinor that has been latent in him since the world was remade. The westward pull that all elves carry in the deep structure of their being. The ache that would someday, in another life, have been torn open into something unbearable by the cry of gulls above a gray river. She tells him it will end. He does not ask how. He says yes before she has finished the sentence. Gimli she gives 3 hairs. He accepts them with shaking hands and a face that contains every emotion a dwarf is architecturally capable of suppressing, and does so inadequately. He would follow her, as he once said, into fire. He would follow her further now. She leaves Boromir for last. He has been standing slightly apart from the others, where the old habit of watching his companions from a position that also permits a clear view of the exits reveals itself in the geometry of his posture, without him knowing it. He is the son of the steward of Gondor, trained since boyhood to read a room for threat vectors. And there is something in this morning's ceremony that has been registering at the edge of his awareness as the particular flavor of a gambit he has not yet identified. She does not speak to him. She shows him, directly, without preface, his father. Denethor in the high hall of Minas Tirith, alive and whole, neither grief-hollowed nor consumed by the Palantir's black sight, but simply present, an old man at a high table in the morning light, reading a letter, an untouched cup of wine beside his hand. The normalcy of it. His father, as he might have been in a world that was not trying to end. Behind his father, through the window of the high hall, Minas Tirith standing. Every level of it. The fountains running. Boromir's jaw tightens. This is the specific tension of a man deciding something and not wanting it to be visible that he is deciding. He looks at Galadriel across the morning air, and the expression in his face is not the fever of the ring's corruption, that compulsion, that unraveling, that he has spent the last weeks of the journey suppressing with the discipline of a soldier. What is in his face now is simpler and cleaner and therefore cuts deeper: recognition. He recognizes the thing she is offering. He has wanted it his entire life. He has never, until this moment, believed it was available. He grips his shield. His knuckles are white against the strap. "My Lady of Gondor," said Boromir, and bowed. Not the bow of a man breaking, not the bow of a man who is lost. The bow of a man who has, after a long march through difficult country, arrived somewhere he did not know he was trying to reach, and who finds, on arrival, that it was worth the journey. The man who in another life would have reached for a hobbit's throat in a forest in Amon Hen, driven past the edge of his will by a burden he had carried too long without enough. That man kneels freely on the grass of Lothlorien and means every degree of the angle. Galadriel receives the bow without moving. She does not smile, she does not soften. She simply accepts it, the way a queen accepts what is owed, not with gratitude, because gratitude implies surprise, and she is not surprised. She knew, when she woke this morning, exactly how this gathering would end. The ring had shown her, with the impersonal clarity of a cartographer's instrument, the precise shape of each person's deepest need. She had simply prepared the gifts accordingly. This is the difference between wisdom and love, on the one hand, and what she is doing, on the other. The difference is so small that it has almost no visible form. Almost. She does not send soldiers. She does not dispatch a rider, or compose a letter, or summon a courier through the golden-lit halls of Caras Galadon to carry her intent northward across the leagues of Rohan. Soldiers are for opponents you cannot reach. Letters are for parties whose cooperation you are not certain of. What Galadriel has now is not an instrument of persuasion. It is a key to every lock, and Saruman's mind, for all its architecture of layered misdirection and careful compartmentalization, is still a lock. She sits in the high chamber, facing east, with her hands resting open in her lap, and she thinks toward Orthanc, in the tower of Isengard, deep in the calculation of his breeding pits. The precise crossbreeding ratios of orc kind and the men of Dunland, the specific generations of selection required to produce a soldier who can move through daylight without flinching. Karunur the White notices a light at the periphery of his mind's eye. He has spent 500 years constructing, within himself, an elaborate architecture of justification. The scaffolding of a mind that has told itself through the long patience of the Third Age that it has remained a clean instrument, organized, sealed, turned always toward its own purposes. He believes this. He has believed it long enough that the belief has become indistinguishable from the truth of the thing, in the way that a man who has been carrying a lie for sufficient years comes to experience it not as a lie, but simply as the shape of reality. The idea that something could arrive at the edge of his thoughts without warning, and simply stand there, patient and luminous. This is not a category he is prepared for. The categories he is prepared for are force and argument and the blunt intrusion of a will trying to overwhelm his own. What he finds instead is something that does not push. The light does not push. It does not announce itself. It simply remains at the boundary of his thoughts, with the quality of a candle placed on a windowsill, visible from outside, making no demand, offering no threat, merely present. Saruman closes his calculations. He sets down his stylus. He turns toward the light with the careful deliberateness of a man approaching something he is not yet willing to identify, and in turning toward it, he opens the door. She steps through. What follows is not a vision in the sense of imagery or spectacle. She is not a showman. What she delivers to Saruman's mind is the experience she has been practicing since midnight, a transmission of truth in its complete and unedited form, without the usual mercies of framing and selection by which one mind presents information to another. She does not argue. she does not persuade. She simply shows him what is true, with the ring's absolute clarity of sight as her instrument, and leaves him to experience the impact of accuracy at full resolution. First, what Sauron intended for Saruman when the war was won. The specific memory she selects is not dramatic. It is a fragment from Sauron's own mind, accessed through the ring's connection to its maker, a single moment, clear and small and total, of Sauron's private consideration of Saruman as a category of object. Not a servant, not an ally, not even, with the slight dignity of hatred, an enemy. An object, specifically, the category of object that has been useful and is no longer needed. The feeling is not anger or contempt. It is absence, the absence of regard for something that no longer computes as relevant. Saruman, in Sauron's private arithmetic of the post-war world, is a negative number. He is the cost of having maintained a useful fiction. He is what gets cleared when the ledger is closed. Saruman sits with this for 3 seconds. Then he does the thing that a lesser mind would not do. He checks it. He runs the logic, looking for the error, the place where her presentation has distorted or edited or inflected. He finds none. He has, after all, been watching Sauron for 200 years with some of the most sophisticated analytical intelligence in Middle-earth. The truth, when he finds it, has the specific texture of something he already almost knew. Second, what the ring is. Not its capabilities. He has spent decades calculating those. What it is. She shows him the moment of its making, the fire of Orod Ruin, and Sauron pouring into the metal not merely craft but self, a portion of his native Maya power, genuine and irreplaceable, an extraction that diminished him in a way no external force could. The ring is not a weapon Sauron made. The ring is a piece of Sauron that Sauron chose to place outside himself, gambling that the control it would give him over lesser rings would be worth the cost of the self-diminishment. It is, at its foundation, an act of profound and characteristic vanity, the belief that his power, divided and extended outward, would be more effective than his power, whole and interior. Saruman, who has studied rings for 3 centuries from exactly this kind of analytical vantage, feels the specific pleasure of a craftsman who has finally been shown the mechanism behind a device he has been examining from the outside. For a fraction of a second, the intellectual satisfaction of understanding is so complete it overrides every other consideration. Then, it returns. Third, what she intends. She shows him Middle-earth preserved. She does not present it as a political program or a military objective. She shows him the libraries. The library at Minas Tirith, which has been losing volumes to moisture and neglect for 300 years since the last great steward scholar died without a competent successor. The archive beneath Orthanc, which he himself has spent 2 centuries building, and which. She shows him this with the calm factuality of a woman who has checked, will not survive the war's end in any scenario she can calculate that does not involve her. The accumulated cartography of the First Age, extant in 3 partial copies held between Rivendell, Gondor, and the Grey Havens, the last of which Círdan has been meaning to have copied for 400 years and has not managed. Every fragment of Elvish scholarship and Mannish record-keeping and Dwarvish geological survey that has survived the attrition of 500 years of gradual civilizational erosion under the shadow's ambient pressure. Under her keeping, nothing is lost. Nothing can be lost. She will preserve it the same way she preserved Lothrin, perfectly, completely, without the cooperation of time. She offers him the curatorship of all of it, not as a servant, she is precise about this, not as a subordinate executing orders. As the foremost scholar in Middle-earth, given unlimited access to an archive that cannot decay and the mandate, her mandate, not subject to revision, to organize, annotate, and develop it with full intellectual independence. The libraries of the world, preserved forever, under the management of the one mind in Middle-earth most qualified to manage them. She withdraws the transmission and waits. Saruman sits in his tower in the dark, above the mechanisms of his breeding pits, and looks at the interior of his own mind. He has spent 5 centuries building, within himself, an elaborate structure of justification. A scaffolding of argument by which each compromise was made to appear reasonable, each alliance with shadow framed as a tactical necessity, each small corruption absorbed into a larger narrative of eventual victory for the good. It is a magnificent construction. He has lived inside it so long he has forgotten that he built it. He believes, genuinely and without self-awareness, that it is not a structure but simply the shape of reality. She has not argued against any of it. She has simply turned on a light in the room, and the scaffolding, which requires a specific quality of darkness to read as reality, has become visible for what it is. He cannot find the sentence to refuse. This is the precise nature of her victory, and it is worth holding here for a moment before the chapter moves on. Saruman was not broken by superior force. He was not deceived by a more sophisticated deception. He was not threatened or coerced or outmaneuvered in the political sense. The elaborate chess of faction and counterfaction he has been playing since the Third Age was young. He was shown what was true. He was given, for the first time in 5 centuries, complete and accurate information, and his judgment, which is genuinely exceptional, operated on that information correctly. Karunr, who deceived the White Council for 200 years. Karunr, who misled Gandalf in his own tower and kept the misdirection so long Gandalf almost convinced himself he had misremembered. Karunr, whose silver voice has been the most effective instrument of persuasion in Middle-earth since Celebrimbor died, he could not be argued out of his position. He was simply shown what was real. The many colors cannot survive contact with the full spectrum. "When shall I begin?" said Saruman, and his voice carried, underneath its usual smoothness, something that might have been relief. The specific relief of a man who has been maintaining a complicated lie for so long that the effort of it has become invisible to him, and who discovers, in the moment it is no longer necessary, how much of himself it was consuming. He agrees to everything. He does not know it yet. She has not asked for anything specific. She has simply opened the door and let him walk in. She does not arrive with an army. An army would be a statement of force, and force is the argument of a mind that lacks better instruments. What she has now is not force, or rather, force is merely the outermost layer of what she has. The blunt edge of a thing that is mostly other things: clarity, reach, the absolute authority of a will that has stopped negotiating with its own hesitation. She arrives the way weather arrives, not announced, simply present, once the conditions are met. The Fellowship enters Minas Tirith 3 days before her, moving through the gate in the early gray of a February morning with the specific quality of men carrying news they have not decided how to deliver. Boromir rides at the front. His return to the city of his birth should, under different circumstances, carry the weight of the prodigal. The son who left on an errand of desperation and returns changed by whatever he found. The guards at the first gate read this in his posture automatically, the way soldiers read posture, and move aside before he reaches them. He does not look like a man returning from a failed mission. He looks like the forerunner of something, which is what he is. Denethor receives him in the high hall. The steward of Gondor sits in his carved chair at the far end of the long room, with his hands resting on the chair's arms and his eyes already calculating the geometry of Boromir's entrance, the pace, the angle, the number of companions, what is present and what is conspicuously absent. Denethor has governed Gondor for 35 years through the instrument of exact observation. He has never needed the Palantir for this. He has needed it only for the specific category of information that exact observation cannot reach, the movements of the enemy's will at distances greater than a rider can cover in a week. "You are alive," said Denethor, and the sentence contained, underneath its flatness, the particular arithmetic of a father who had prepared himself for subtraction. "I am, my lord," said Boromir. "And the errand?" A pause. Boromir is not a man who pauses before his father. The pause tells Denethor everything before the words do. "Resolved," said Boromir. "After a fashion. What follows between father and son, behind the closed doors of the steward's private chamber, the script does not enter. The conversation is real and specific, and it belongs to them. What matters, for the purposes of this story, is its result. When Boromir leaves the chamber 2 hours later, Denethor does not come to the door. He does not watch his son go. He sits in the private room with his hands in the same position they occupied in the high hall, resting, controlled, giving nothing away to the empty air, and for the first time in 35 years of governance. He does not already know what he is going to do next. He waits. He pulls the Palantir from its cloth in the locked chest beneath the window, and he looks into it. The stone is dark. Not the darkness of distance or obstruction, the darkness of something brighter than the stone can mediate having entered its range. The Palantir does not show him Galadriel, it simply ceases to show him anything else. He wraps it again and puts it away and sits with the particular stillness of a man who has just received information he cannot immediately classify. She enters Minas Tirith at dawn on the 3rd day after the Fellowship's arrival. She is alone. This is the first thing the guards at the Great Gate register, because the Great Gate of Minas Tirith is not a door that individuals approach. It is a door built for the passage of armies, wide enough for 6 horsemen riding abreast, and the scale of it is calculated to reduce the individual to proportion. The gate says, architecturally, that what matters here is mass and number and collective force. It is a door that has never been designed to be walked through by one person. She walks through it anyway, and the gate's statement revises itself in the presence of someone it was not built to accommodate. The guards do not challenge her. This is not, or not entirely, a supernatural compulsion. It is closer to the experience of a man who has rehearsed a speech and arrives at the moment to deliver it, and finds that the situation has already resolved without him. The challenge is in his throat. The gate is already decided. He lowers his spear. She moves through the city's 7 levels without stopping. The streets are narrow in the lower circles, built for defense, angled to break a charge, cobbled with the dark stone of Mindalluin. In the early morning they carry the specific population of cities preparing for war, soldiers in transit. A column of wounded men being helped toward the houses of healing, a cart of timber moving toward the walls where the catapults are being positioned, a woman standing in a doorway watching the cart pass with the expression of someone doing the mathematics of how much time remains. These are people who have been living at the edge of a specific emergency for months. And what that does to a city's face is visible in every threshold, every shuttered window, every soldier who has stopped moving his hands when he stands still. As she passes, they stop. Not from compulsion, or not from compulsion alone. The way they stop is the way people stop when something enters their field of vision that does not fit the category of things they have been organizing their attention around. They are prepared for news, for orders, for threats, for the escalation of the emergency that has been building since word came that Osgiliath's east bank was lost. They are not prepared for something that arrives from outside the register of the emergency entirely, that occupies a different category, older and less conditional, which the body recognizes before the mind has framing for it. A child on the 3rd level, sitting on a step, watches her pass, does not speak. Watches with the complete and uncalculating attention that children give to things that adults have already begun to classify and therefore no longer see clearly. Denethor is not in the high hall when she arrives at the 7th level. He has come down. He stands in the courtyard of the white tree, the dead tree, silver-barked and leafless, which has stood without living for nearly 200 years as a monument to the absence of the king. He stands beside it with his hands at his sides and his face composed into the specific arrangement that 35 years of governance have made his default against the world, controlled, assessing, giving nothing away. She crosses the courtyard toward him. The dead tree is between them as she approaches, and for a moment, 3 paces, no more, she passes behind it, and its bare branches are between her face and his. Then she comes clear of it, and Denethor sees her fully for the first time, and the composed arrangement of his face holds for exactly 1 second longer than it should. He is not a man who frightens easily. He is not a man who allows himself to be impressed by presentation. He has sat across tables from the emissaries of Rohan and Dol Amroth and the far southern fiefs, men who arrived with every instrument of ceremony and rank deployed, and he has assessed them with the same cold arithmetic he applies to everything else. He is, in the fundamental grammar of his character, a man who does not adjust his evaluation based on how something appears. He adjusts. She does not give him a speech. She does not offer him the vision she gave Aragorn, the perfected kingdom, the gleaming towers, the people ungrieving. She gives him something more precise, because she has read him through the ring's sight with the accuracy that the Palantir's dark stone suggested. She gives Denethor the thing that his despair, which is the organizing principle of his entire worldview, most requires in order to function. She gives him a reason to believe that hope is not a child's lie, not through argument, not through evidence marshaled and presented for his evaluation. She simply stands before him in the gray morning light in the courtyard of the dead tree, and she is, in the fullness of what she is, Calaquendi. 3,000 years of endurance. A being who has watched Beleriand drown and Aragion burn and every realm she has loved diminish, and who is still here, still standing, still capable of meeting the morning, and the despair that has been Denethor's most intimate companion for 3 decades, looks at this and finds that it cannot maintain its argument. Despair requires the belief that what is coming cannot be survived. She is the evidence that it can be. He comes down from the step on which he has been standing and does something he has not done. in the memory of anyone in Gondor, for the entirety of his tenure as steward. He bows, not to a conqueror, not to a force he cannot resist. He bows the way a man bows who has spent 35 years holding a city against the long night through nothing but will and intelligence and the absolute refusal to stop, and who finds, arriving in his courtyard at dawn, someone who has been doing the same thing for 3,000 years and has not broken. It does not look like defeat. That is the most disquieting thing about it. They come in the black hours before what would have been the Pelennor. 9 figures on horses of shadow, moving across the Pelennor fields in the pre-dawn dark with the particular quality of motion that distinguishes them from everything else that moves through the world. They do not displace the darkness as they ride through it. They move within it, of it, the way a current moves within water, present and directional and without edge. Behind them, across the Anduin and the ruined crossing of Osgiliath, the armies of Mordor wait. 100,000 fires on the eastern bank, each one small, the collective mass of them making the horizon above Mordor the color of a wound. The Witch King rides at the head of the 9. He has no face. He has not had a face since the year that is now so remote it does not have a number in the common reckoning. Since the night he accepted a ring from a figure who wore the guise of a friend and felt the gold close on his finger and understood, too late, what he had agreed to. He has been a consequence of that moment for 3,000 years. His will is not his own, has not been his own in so long that the concept of a will that is one's own has become theoretical, the way a man born blind theorizes about color. He serves the ring. The ring is the organizing principle of everything he is. He rides toward Minas Tirith because the ring has called him. This is routine. The ring is always calling him, a directional pressure, a gravity, the one constant of his existence that functions as north functions for a compass, not comfort, not warmth, but orientation. Without it he would not know which way to face. Tonight, the call is wrong, not the ring. The ring is present. He can feel its specific weight in the world's fabric, the way you feel a fire's heat before you see its light. The ring is there, ahead, closer than it has been since the Shire when he nearly had it and lost it on Weathertop. But the direction is wrong. The pull comes not from the east, from Mordor and its master, but from inside the walls. The 9 reach the gate. They halt. 9 shadows on 9 horses, formed in a line before the great gate of Minas Tirith, and in the silence before the gate the Witch King does something that the armies of men watching from the walls have never seen him do in the long history of his sieges. He waits. He is waiting because the call from inside the walls has the specific quality of a summons rather than a lure, and he is, at the level of his most fundamental nature, a thing that responds to summons. The gate opens. Galadriel walks out alone. She crosses the open ground between the gate and the 9 at a pace that contains no urgency and no hesitation. The pace of a woman who has already determined the outcome and is simply closing the remaining distance between herself and its execution. The pre-dawn dark of the Pelennor is cold and flat and wide, and she is very small against it, and the 9 are very large against it. And the arithmetic of the scene, read visually, suggests a specific outcome that the arithmetic of power does not support. She stops 12 paces from the Witch King. He raises his mace. This is not a decision, or it is a decision in the way a stone falling is a decision. It is the expression of what he is, the single mode of response available to a being whose will has been, for 3,000 years, the will of the ring's master. Threat is present. He removes threat. This is the complete syntax of his existence. She raises her hand. From the ring, which he can feel on her finger with the acuity of a nerve ending, which is more real to him than anything in the visible world, issues a light that is not the file's light, not the contained and captured light of Arundel's star, but the source from which the file was drawn. She has not amplified anything. She has simply removed the vessel. What the feel held in the quantity of a cup, she holds in the quantity of its origin, Calaquendi radiance, the light of the 2 trees as it resides within a being who looked upon them in the years when the world was still learning how to be the world, channeled through the most powerful object ever made by a hand in Middle-earth. The darkness that is a Nazgûl is not a poetic description. It is a material fact. They exist in the visible world as concentrations of shadow, the absence of light organized around a will that was once a man's and is now a ring's. Light does not destroy them in the usual sense, does not burn or wound, but it displaces them, fills the space they occupy with something incompatible with what they are. The way a sound wave fills a space and leaves no room for silence. What she sends is not a wave, it is a flood. The 9 shadows fill with light the way rooms fill when a door opens onto noon, not gradually, not from one direction, but everywhere at once, the illumination having no source within the shadow, because the source is outside it, and the shadow has no interior that the light cannot reach. The Witch King's mace arm stops mid-rise. His horse, which is not a horse in any biological sense, but a shape that darkness has learned to hold in the form of a horse, becomes still, not frozen from outside. Still, in the way that things are still when the organizing principle that was animating them has been interrupted. She does not destroy them. She has considered this and chosen against it, and the choice is not mercy in the conventional sense. It is precision. The 9 are bound to the ring. The ring is now hers. They are, by the logic of that binding, hers, and what is yours you do not waste. What she does is something the lore Bible calls suspension, the same power by which Nenya held Lothrian's trees in their perpetual October. The same principle extended to a different order of being. She takes the 9 at the moment of their contact with her light, and she holds them there. Not frozen in the sense of cold or rigidity. Held, as a note is held, the sound still present, still vibrating, still entirely itself, simply not permitted to move on to the next sound. They stand on the Pelennor in the positions the light found them, the Witch King mid-strike, the other 8 in their riding formation, horses mid-stride. 9 black pillars in the pre-dawn dark, each one perfectly preserved at the instant of its interruption. They cannot act. They cannot dissipate. They cannot answer the voice of Mordor, which is already calling them back. The distant pull of Sauron's diminished will reaching across the Anduin and finding nothing that responds. They stand on the Pelennor fields of Gondor, and they will stand there, by the logic of her power, for as long as she holds them, which is to say, until she chooses otherwise, which is to say, indefinitely, the armies of Mordor on the eastern bank of the Anduin see it. At a distance, in the dark, without full understanding of what they are seeing, but they see the 9 go still, see the light at Minas Tirith's gate, feel in the ambient spiritual fabric of the world that something they were relying on to be a weapon is no longer a weapon. The effect moves through the assembled host of Mordor not as a sound, but as a sensation. The collective equivalent of the moment when a man realizes that the ground under his foot is not ground. On the walls of Minas Tirith, Boromir watches. He has fought the Nazgûl's ambient dread since the breaking of the Fellowship's attempt to cross Caradhras. He has carried the specific memory of Weathertop, Frodo's cry, the black figures on the hilltop. The terror that is not fear of injury but fear of dissolution, as a soldier carries the memory of his worst field, not forgotten, not resolved, present at the edge of everything. He watches the Witch King stop. He watches the 9 stand still as pillars in the pre-dawn dark, the light of the ring holding them with the unceremonious finality of a library volume returned to its shelf. Each one in its place, available but not active, waiting for a reader who may not come. He says nothing. He does not need to. The expression on his face is not triumph. It is closer to the expression of a man who has spent his entire adult life defending a wall against a specific kind of assault, who discovers that the specific kind of assault has a solution, and that the solution was always available, and that no one before tonight had the means to apply it. The Witch King, who broke Gondor's gate with a word, who has been the instrument of 3,000 years of terror, who rode across the Pelennor in the cannon's tail and met the prophesied exception of a woman and a hobbit and a merciful loophole in a line of verse, stands before a woman who has not raised her voice. He cannot move. He cannot speak. He is simply stopped, not by a sword, not by a loophole in a prophecy, not by the exception that the verse permitted, by the same quiet and absolute patience she used to tend her garden, applied, tonight, at a different scale, to a different order of problem. The pre-dawn dark of the Pelennor settles back into itself around the 9 still figures. The Anduin moves east of the city. The fires of Mordor burn on the far bank without advancing. The gate of Minas Tirith stands open behind her. She turns and walks back through it. She does not look at the 9 again. There is no need. They will be there when she returns to consider what use to make of them, and they will be exactly as she left them, because nothing she places under the ring's holding moves without her permission. This is the quality that separates her from every military commander who has ever faced the Nazgûl. She does not think of them as a problem that required solving. She thinks of them as a resource that required organizing. She reaches for the Palantir first. This is the detail that matters. In the history of every encounter between a holder of one of the Seeing Stones and the Dark Lord who has turned the Ithil Stone to his purposes, the structure has always been the same. Sauron waits at the center, and others approach him, drawn or compelled or curious, and he meets them on ground of his own preparation. He met Denethor there across 30 years of careful, incremental manipulation, feeding the steward's despair with selected truths, turning Gondor's most formidable mind into an instrument of its own defeat. He met Aragorn there at Orthanc and drove his will against a man who had been preparing for exactly that encounter and barely held. He is, in the architecture of the Palantir Channel, always the defender of a fortress he has had centuries to fortify. Galadriel does not approach his fortress. She sits in the high chamber of Minas Tirith, the steward's library, chosen for its altitude and its view of the eastern horizon, with the Anor stone on the table before her and her hands resting on either side of it, not touching it yet. She looks at it for a moment with the ring's clear sight and reads the stone's history in the way a scholar reads the marginalia in a borrowed book. The accumulated marks of everyone who has used it, the specific quality of Denethor's long occupation of it, the faint residue of Sauron's touch like smoke on stone after a fire has been extinguished. She reads all of it, catalogues it, and then she places her hands on the Palantir and opens it and reaches east. She does not reach toward Sauron. She reaches past him, through the channel the stone provides, past the eye's position at the center of its own web, into the dark of Mordor itself, and she simply looks. She looks at Barad-dûr from the inside, its corridors, its garrison. The specific number of orcs quartered in the eastern wing, the structural weaknesses in the tower's lower foundations, where the volcanic rock of the plain has been shifting for 3 decades, and Sauron's engineers have been compensating with increasingly improvised buttressing. She reads Mordor the way she reads a text, completely, systematically, with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has decided the library is hers and is doing an inventory. Sauron becomes aware of her presence in his stone the way a householder becomes aware of a stranger in their house, not through announcement, but through the specific quality of disruption that a foreign attention creates in a space that has only ever contained its owner's gaze. He turns. He finds her already there, already past him, already reading. The response he assembles is not immediate, because his first instinct, the instinct honed across 3 ages of domination, is to understand the nature of what he is facing before committing to an approach. He has felt the ring since it was claimed. He has felt who holds it. He has spent the weeks since Lothlorien processing the specific dimensions of what this means with the portion of his intelligence not consumed by the operational emergency of his armies and the Nine, and the loss of his most reliable instruments of terror. He has reached, already, the conclusion that direct confrontation is not his best avenue. What he chooses instead is the approach that has served him best across the centuries, the argument from commonality. You and I are not so different. His will communicates through the stone's channel, not in words, exactly, but in the precise pressure of a meaning that arrives complete, the way a mathematical statement arrives complete, without requiring the mediation of language. We are both makers, both preservers, in our way. I have spent 3 ages attempting to bring order to a world that destroys everything beautiful it produces. You have spent 3 ages attempting to hold one forest against the same entropy. We have been working toward the same end from different directions. She continues her inventory of Bered Doctor's eastern wing. He adjusts. You were Noldor before you were anything else. The Noldor and I built together, Celebrimbor's hands, yes, but my knowledge. The ring you wear, the ring your craftsmen made in Eregion, exists because I taught them. We made the beautiful things. We made them together. The world has forgotten this. I have not forgotten this. She reaches the lower foundations, the shifting rock. She notes the specific location of the worst instability with the attention of someone noting a reference for later use. He adjusts again, and this adjustment is the most sophisticated one, the one that costs him something to make, because it requires him to acknowledge a category of reality he has spent 3 ages systematically dismantling in himself. I know what I am, his will sends. I know what has been done to what I was. Mauron, yes, you knew me when I was Mauron. You knew what I was before Morgoth's touch remade me. If you can see me clearly enough to hold the ring and not break under it, then you can see clearly enough to see that what I am now is not what I chose to begin as. This one, she answers. She does not answer it with an argument. She answers it with a correction. the specific and narrow correction of a scholar who has encountered a factual error in an otherwise carefully constructed text. The correction is this: he did choose. Morgoth did not take Mairon by force or deception. Mairon went. He looked at Morgoth's project of reshaping the world according to a single will's vision, and he recognized in it, with perfect clarity, the thing he most admired, the purest possible expression of craft applied at the largest possible scale. And he chose it. He was not deceived. He was convinced. And the thing that convinced him was not evil, was not corruption in any simple sense, but the specific appeal that the desire to make things hold their shape has for a mind that loves making. The same appeal, she notes without emphasis, that she felt in the glade when Frodo held the ring out to her. The difference between them, she communicates through the stone, is not in the original desire. It is in what she has chosen to do with hers, and what he has had 3 ages to demonstrate he does with his. The channel goes quiet for a moment that has the specific quality of a held breath. Then he reaches through the ring. This is the move she has been waiting for, the direct attempt, through the connection the ring maintains to its maker, to reclaim some fraction of control over the gold itself. He pours his will along that channel, with the full force available to him in his diminished state, not the power of the Second Age, not Anatar at the height of his persuasion. Not the figure who stood on Ord-Rún and poured himself into the metal. This is Sauron as he is now, reduced, bodiless, a will without a form to anchor it, and the force of him is still, by the measure of anything in Middle-earth short of the Valar themselves, immense. He finds the ring. He finds her holding it. The sensation that reaches him through the channel is not resistance. Resistance implies a surface pushing back against pressure. What he finds is something more complete and less negotiable, the way water finds a shore and does not push against it but simply is contained by it, because the shore's nature is to contain, and the water's nature cannot alter that. She does not fight him along the channel. She simply remains what she is at the end of it, and what she is, Calaquendi, 3,000 years of endurance, a will that chose correctly at the dawn of the world and has never had cause to revise that choice, does not yield to him, because yielding is not one of the options available to the thing he is pressing against. He presses harder, then harder again. Then, with the specific, focused intensity of a mind that does not have a body and therefore cannot tire in the way bodies tire, sustained, total, the full remaining mass of his will directed down the channel toward the ring on her finger. She holds the inventory of Bered Doctor's eastern wing in the front of her mind, throughout. The shifting rock, the structural weakness, the specific calculations she will need when the time comes. She does not set this aside to meet his assault. She conducts both simultaneously, with the same ease with which a great musician holds 2 lines of counterpoint, not because it costs her nothing, but because what it costs her is within the range of what she has to spend. After a time she will not record afterward how long, because the measurement of time inside the Palantir's channel is unreliable, the pressure decreases, then recedes, then stops. Sauron, who has not withdrawn from any contest in the Second or Third Age by any mechanism short of strategic retreat, withdraws, not strategically, not with the calculated timing of a commander who chooses the moment of disengagement to preserve maximum future optionality. He withdraws the way a wave withdraws when the tide that produced it has reached its limit, not by choice, but by the exhaustion of the force that was sustaining it. The Palantir goes dark. Galadriel removes her hands from the stone and sets them in her lap, and looks at the eastern horizon through the library window. The sky above Mordor is still the color it has been for 2 ages, the red-orange of a country whose earth is volcanic and whose air carries ash. She looks at it with the ring's clarity and reads the army deployments on the eastern bank of the Anduin. The logistics of Sauron's supply lines from the south, the specific weaknesses in the Morannon's northwestern approach. She reads all of it with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to the Palantir's channel. Then, she takes a clean sheet of parchment from the steward's desk, and she begins to write. She writes for 2 hours without stopping, in the precise and unhurried hand of a scholar who has had 3,000 years to develop an efficient notation system. When she finishes, she reads it back once. She corrects 3 minor errors of transcription. Then she sets it aside and folds her hands and looks out the window again. In Bered Doctor in the Dark, Sauron's diminished will reassembles itself slowly. The way smoke reassembles after a wind has dispersed it, not into anything new, but back into the shape it has maintained for 3 ages. He does not call the 9. They do not answer. He does not reach for the Palantir. The channel is closed. He does not reach through the ring, because what he found at the end of the ring is still precisely what he found, and finding it again will not change its nature. He thinks toward the south, toward the Haradrim and the armies still moving north, toward the pieces still in play, toward the geometries of the situation that have not yet fully resolved. He thinks for a long time. For the first time since the fall of Menor, he cannot find a move. The march to Mordor does not look like the march to Mordor. In the canon's telling, the army of the West departs Minas Tirith with the specific quality of a last gesture, a force too small for its stated purpose, led by men who know they are buying time for a hobbit, walking toward a darkness they cannot defeat through any military calculus available to them. There is grief in that march. There is a particular courage that is inseparable from despair, the courage of people who have run out of alternatives and chosen to spend themselves cleanly. This march has a different quality. It departs Minas Tirith on a morning 3 weeks after Galadriel's arrival in the city, when the winter is loosening its grip on the Pelennor and the mud of the plain has begun to carry the specific smell of earth reconsidering itself after cold. The force is larger than the army of the West, Gondor's full garrison augmented by the Rohirrim, who have arrived under Omer in the days since the Nine were stopped on the field before the gate, Rohan having received word that something has changed in the south and sent riders to discover what, and the riders having returned with a report that Thodin received seated and did not speak for a long time after. The Rohirrim are here. The force of Dol Amroth is here. The southern fiefs have answered early, their levies arriving in Minas Tirith while the city still has the resources to receive them properly. The Galadrim move at the column's center. They are fewer in number than the forces of men around them and entirely unlike them in bearing, where the soldiers of Gondor carry the posture of men going to a war they intend to survive. The Galadrim move with the quality of people accompanying an event rather than prosecuting one. They are not an army in the conventional sense. They are an escort. Galadriel walks. This detail spreads through the column before they have been on the road half a day, passed in the low specific voices that soldiers use when they are conveying information rather than conversation. She walks. Not on horseback. Not carried. She walks in the column center, in the pace of the march, and she does not appear to find the pace taxing, and she does not appear to be making an effort to appear as though she does not find it taxing. She simply walks, with the particular quality of someone for whom the physical distance between here and there is a secondary consideration to what happens when she arrives. Aragorn rides at the column's head. He does not look back. The Morannon, the Black Gate of Mordor, built in the Second Age at Sauron's direction from the black iron stone of the mountains, flanked by the Towers of the Teeth, and designed to the specific architectural specifications of a mind that has spent 2 ages calculating how to make an entrance impassable, is visible from 3 leagues distant. Even at this range it registers as a fact rather than a structure. The gate exists in the landscape the way a cliff exists, as something the world simply contains, and that other things are forced to accommodate. As the column approaches, the usual response begins to assemble itself. The gate's towers are occupied. She can see the orc garrisons, thousands of them, positioned at the crenellations and visible even at distance by the specific quality of the light they do not reflect. Catapults on the tower's upper levels. The gate itself sealed with a mass of iron and cold sorcery that has resisted every assault brought against it in the 700 years since the last alliance passed through it behind Sauron's broken forces. She walks past Aragorn at the column's head without stopping. She walks alone, across the open ground between the column's front and the gate, in the silence that assembles itself around a situation that has not yet found its outcome. Behind her, the army of the West halts without being ordered to halt. Aragorn's raised fist is almost simultaneous with the halt it signals, but the halt was already beginning before his arm moved, the men reading the situation with the instinct of soldiers who understand that what is happening in front of them has entered a register in which they are not the relevant instrument. She stops before the Morannon at a distance of 30 paces. The ring's authority over the structures of Mordor is not a dramatic thing to observe from the outside. There is no visible light, no audible command. What happens is this: the gate, which was built by hands following directions issued by the will that currently resides on her finger, and which therefore contains within its own making the embedded instruction to respond to that will, responds. The mechanisms of iron and sorcery that have held it sealed disengage in the specific sequence of their construction, each lock releasing in the order it was made, the most recent ones first, the oldest and deepest last, like a speech being unsaid word by word back to its first syllable. The gate opens. It opens not with the violence of forced entry, but with the deliberateness of a door opened by its owner from the inside. The sound it makes is the sound of something very large that has not moved in a long time moving, the deep structural complaint of iron and stone acknowledging a change in their instructions. It takes 3 minutes. When it is done, the Morannon stands open on the plains of Udden beyond, and the sky above Mordor is visible through the gap. That characteristic sky, red-edged and ash-filtered, the atmosphere of a country that has been a foundry for 3 ages. She walks through. The army follows, and the following has the quality of a tide moving through a channel, not forced, simply directional. The path open and the direction clear, and the force behind it too continuous to interrogate. The orcs of Mordor are not what she expected. Or rather, she expected what the ring's sight showed her, but the sight and the reality of standing among them are different experiences. The way a map of a landscape and the landscape itself are different experiences. They are everywhere. The plains of Udden, the rocky corridors between Cirith Gorgur and the wider plain of Gorgoroth, the slopes of the mountains on either side where the garrisons are quartered in structures that are less buildings than organized caves. 100,000 of them, variously armed, variously arranged, and united in one thing: they have not attacked. The reason is the ring. What Sauron's will produced in his armies through fear and compulsion, Galadriel's produces through something that orc kind does not have a framework to process, and therefore cannot resist. A direct address to whatever remains, beneath 3 ages of Morgoth's breeding and Sauron's conditioning, of what they were before they were what they are. The ring's reach, combined with the Calaquendi perception she has always possessed, allows her to see it, the buried light in each of them, corrupted past any surface recognition but present, irreducibly, in the deep structure of their being. She sees the elvish origin, she sees what Morgoth found and what he did to it, and the specific quality of what survived the doing. She does not offer them mercy in the sense of a commander offering terms to a defeated force. She does not speak to them at all. What she does is extend the ring's preservation field outward from herself as she moves through the plain, and the field touches them, and what it touches it holds, and what it holds it reads, and in reading, acknowledges, they feel themselves perceived, not as weapons, not as instruments, not as the category of creature that exists to be used and discarded. They feel themselves perceived as what they are, things that were made wrong, from something that was made right, and have been suffering the distance between those two facts for as long as they have existed. They stop moving, not all at once. In sequence, outward from her position, as the field's reach extends, like a sound wave moving through a medium that has been waiting for exactly this frequency. One after another, from the center outward, the orcs of Mordor stand still. 100,000 dark creatures, suspended at the moment she chooses, held in the ring's preservation the way Lothlorien's leaves are held in their autumn color, not dead, not sleeping, not freed, not remade, simply held. Available, in principle, for a future consideration that has not yet been scheduled. She notes their positions with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to the structural inventory of Barad Doctor. She moves through them toward the tower, and they are still as she passes, and the army of the West moves through the spaces between them in a silence that none of the soldiers will be able to describe adequately when they try to recount it later. The silence of a battlefield on which nothing is fighting. Barad-dûr stands on its hill of ash above the plain of Gorgoroth. It is not tall in the way that towers built for human occupation are tall. It is tall in the way that a geological feature is tall. In the way that the argument for something's importance is tall. Its height is a statement, and the statement is that everything which exists in its sight exists at the pleasure of what stands at its center. She stands before it and looks at it for a long time. Then she calls upon Yavanna's gift. This is the power that has always moved through Nenya beneath the surface of its preservation function, the deeper nature of a ring associated with water and with growth. The foundational fact that preservation and fertility are not separate powers but two expressions of the same root. Lothlorien's trees did not merely fail to die under Nenya's influence. They grew, slowly, in directions that no other forest grows, toward light that other forests cannot see, toward a quality of flourishing that ordinary arboricultural processes cannot account for. Nenya's fertility was always there. It simply operated, until now, within the bounds she kept it within. The One Ring removes the bounds. From the base of Barad Doctor's western foundation, where the volcanic stone meets the ash plain, in the crack where water from the mountain's flank has been accumulating in a shallow channel for 3 ages, the first flower appears. White asphodel, growing from black stone, with the deliberateness of something that has been waiting for the conditions to become correct and finds them. This morning. Correct, then another. Then a line of them, moving up the foundation's face the way cracks move through stone, not randomly, but along the path of least resistance, which in this case is the path where the moisture lives and the ring's reach has warmed the rock a fraction of a degree above what growth requires. The silver Eleanor comes next, on the upper levels, where the stone's surface has been catching the ash-filtered sunlight for centuries, and retains a warmth that the lower levels do not have. It grows in clusters, small and luminous, the way stars cluster, not because they have been planted in a pattern, but because the conditions that favor one also favor its neighbors. By the time the army of the West reaches the tower's base, its lower third is covered. The flowers do not destroy the stone. They do not crack it or obscure it. They grow between the stones and over them, and through every fissure and gap the 3 ages of the tower's existence have opened in its fabric. And the effect is not ruin. It is addition. The black stone of Barad Doctor beneath the white and silver of the flowers is still entirely present. Still entirely itself, still readable as what it is. The flowers do not replace it. They inhabit it. The most evil architecture in Middle-earth, draped in things that grow toward light. Boromir stands in the army below and looks up at it and does not find the words, and is unusual in this respect only in that he is aware of not finding them. The men around him also do not find the words. They stand in the plain below the flowering tower and look up at it with the faces of people confronting something their categories were not built to accommodate. It is genuinely beautiful. That is the thing no one can argue with, standing in the ash plain of Gorgoroth with the suspended orcs at their backs and the flowering tower before them. It is beautiful with a completeness that makes argument feel inappropriate, the way argument feels inappropriate in the presence of a sunset or a mathematical proof. The beauty is real. The flowers are real. They will not die. They will bloom on the slopes of Barad Doctor forever, in the preserved light of this particular morning, tended by a power that does not get tired and does not forget. They are also entirely, in every particular of their placement, her choice. Yavanna did not plant them. Yavanna was not consulted. The earth that the flowers grow in is Mordor's earth, ancient volcanic rock and centuries of ash, and it produces them now because a will that has taken into itself the power to determine what the earth produces has determined that it will produce this. Here, because she finds it beautiful and correct. The flowers sway in a wind that carries no ash and smells of nothing but growing things. They are perfect. They are permanent. They belong entirely to her. At the heart of the flowering tower there is a room that has no windows. It was built without them deliberately, not from oversight, not from an architect's error, but from the specific preference of the mind that commissioned it. Sauron has not needed windows since the Second Age. Windows are instruments for beings who require the external world to remind them of what exists. He has never required this. The external world has, for the entirety of his occupation of Barad-dûr, existed at the periphery of his attention, a subordinate consideration. The place where his plans are executed rather than the place where they originate. The tower's innermost chamber was always, by design, interior, a space that contained only itself and him. She enters it alone. The army of the West remains below, on the ash plain, under Aragorn's command. She has not given Aragorn specific instructions for this interval, she has simply indicated. With the precision of someone issuing a directive they expect to require no further elaboration, that she will return when the interior work is complete, and that the exterior work, until then, is his. He has accepted this with the specific quality of acceptance he has been practicing since Lothlorien, complete, considered, and carrying underneath it the layer of unasked questions that he has concluded, correctly, would not improve his situation to ask. The corridors of Barad-dûr are empty. The garrison is suspended on the plains outside. The structural elements of the tower, its stairways, its load-bearing walls, the mechanical infrastructure of 3 ages of dark engineering, are present and intact and entirely still, the way a machine is still when the power driving it has been removed. She moves through them with the lamp of the ring's sight illuminating everything to the same flat clarity, every stone, every fitted joint, every place where the workmanship of the Second Age meets the improvised additions of the Third. She reads the tower as she moves through it, in the way she has been reading everything since the Glade, completely, systematically, without hierarchy of importance. Because the ring does not edit. She finds him in the inner chamber, or rather, she finds the space that he occupies, which is not the same thing as finding him in the way one finds a person in a room. There is no body. There has not been a body, in any form capable of containing his full presence, since Menor went under the sea in the Second Age. Since the moment when the physical form he had spent an age cultivating was destroyed in the cataclysm he helped cause, and his spirit was scattered across the changed world, and it took him 1,000 years to reconstitute even the diminished, formless thing he now is. What occupies the inner chamber of Barad-dûr is a presence in the older sense, a concentration of will dense enough to alter the quality of the air around it, a heat without a source, a resentment so old and so total that it has become structural, part of the room rather than something the room contains. She stands in the doorway and looks at it without speaking. This is the first thing she does, and it is not a small thing. She looks. With the full and unhurried attention of a Calaquendi who has borne the One Ring for weeks and learned the grammar of its sight, she looks at what Sauron has become. Not what he presents. He is not, at this moment, presenting anything. He has no presentation left. The guise of Anatar having been unavailable to him since Menor, and the lesser forms of shadow and menace having been burned away in the Palantir duel. But what he is. The specific and unedited truth of him, readable now through the ring's clarity the way the structural weaknesses of Barad-dûr were readable, the way Saruman's interior architecture was readable, the way the deepest needs of the Fellowship were readable. The ring shows her everything it touches without mercy or selection, and what it shows her now is this: Mehron. Not as a separate entity, not as a prior self that the current Sauron has superseded and left behind. Mehron is present within what Sauron has become the way a bone is present within a body, invisibly, structurally. The thing that everything else is built around. Mehron the Admirable, Ol's craftsman. The mind that could hold the complete specifications of a complex structure and active attention simultaneously, and identify the one element whose adjustment would make it not merely functional but beautiful. Because for Mehron, those two qualities were never separate. Function achieved its highest expression as beauty. This was the foundational conviction of his original nature, and it is present still, buried under 3 ages of corruption, unchanged in itself even as everything built on top of it has been catastrophically altered. She sees the precise moment of his first departure. It is not a dramatic moment, in the way that a story's turning points are usually dramatic. It does not announce itself with violence or spectacle. It is a conversation, Morgoth's voice and Mehron's attention, and in Mehron's attention the specific quality of a craftsman who has just been shown a project of such scale and ambition that his resistance to the moral implications is simply outpaced by his interest in the technical ones. Not seduced. Not deceived. Interested, that is the precise word for what happened at the beginning, and it is the most damning possible word for it. Because interest implies evaluation, and evaluation implies choice. He chose. He found Morgoth's project more interesting than the alternative, and he went. She shows this back to him, not as accusation, not with the prosecutorial emphasis of a mind that has already determined the verdict and is now constructing the record. She shows it with the flat and complete accuracy of the ring's sight, the moment itself as it was, without inflection. She holds it up the way a mirror holds up a face. Entirely, without editorial. The heat in the room changes. The resentment that has been part of the chamber's atmosphere since she entered it shifts, not diminishing exactly, but losing its directional quality. Resentment is a form of argument, and argument requires an opponent to push against, and what she is doing does not give him an opponent to push against. She is not arguing. She is not even challenging. She is simply witnessing, with a precision and completeness that no being has ever brought to bear on him before, because no being before tonight has had both the sight to see him clearly and the ground on which to stand while doing it. He attempts to reassemble his presentation. The force that in the Palantir duel he directed outward through the channel, he turns inward. Toward the self-conception that has sustained him across 3 ages, the architecture of identity that Sauron has built around the core of what Mehron was. He is the Lord of Gifts. He is Gorthor the Cruel. He is the Necromancer, the Shadow, the Eye that does not sleep. He has been these things for so long that they have acquired the solidity of fact, the inevitability of geology, the self-evidence of a mountain that has been a mountain for long enough that the question of what it was before it was a mountain stops feeling like a question worth asking. She waits. He reaches for the identity and finds in her accurate witness that the identity is visible as construction. Not false, it was built from true materials. From genuine power genuinely exercised across genuine ages of the world. But constructed. Chosen. The elaborate edifice of a self that a craftsman built around the fact of a choice he made. The way a building is built around its load-bearing element, obscuring the element from view, extending so far above and around it that its presence is forgotten. Its nature concealed even from the building's occupant. She shows him the load-bearing element. The choice. Clear and plain and exactly the size it actually is. One choice. Made by one craftsman. At one moment. For reasons that were comprehensible and real and entirely his. Not Morgoth's doing. Not the world's doing. His. The heat in the room decreases. It is subtle at first. The kind of change you notice not in the moment it begins, but slightly after, when the absence of something you had stopped perceiving as distinct from the room itself makes itself felt by its withdrawal. The concentrated presence that has been part of Barad Doctor's inner chamber since the tower was built begins to thin. Not explosively. Not with the violence of the ring's destruction or the cataclysm of Enmenor. The way a fire thins when the fuel it has been burning is consumed, gradually from the edges inward, the intensity maintaining at the center while the periphery releases its heat into the cooler air and does not reclaim it. He does not speak. There is nothing to say. And this, perhaps, is the most precise expression of what is happening. Because Sauron has never, in 3 ages of manipulation and argument, and the layered sophistication of Anatar's lies, and the brute declarations of his power, been without something to say. Language has been his instrument since before Middle-earth was middle. He has always had the next sentence, the next frame, the next angle of approach. She has not left him an angle. The resentment thins. The heat thins. The sense of a directional will present in the room and pushing against the world thins, losing the quality of direction first, becoming less of a force and more of a residue. The will without the vector that made it a will rather than simply a condition of the air. She watches this with the same attention she brought to the opening of the Morannon, to the suspension of the Nine, to the flowering of Barad Doctor's foundation. Complete, unhurried, reading the process as it proceeds rather than acting upon it. There is nothing for her to do. She has done the one thing that was hers to do. She has seen him accurately and shown him the truth of what she saw. And the truth is doing the rest without her assistance. Sauron, Anatar, Gordher, the Necromancer, the Lord of the Rings, the greatest surviving servant of the first and greatest Dark Lord, the being who broke the last alliance and turned Enmenor from the world and forged the instruments of dominion across the entirety of the Second Age and most of the Third, dissipates, not quickly, not all at once. In the manner of spirits whose coherence has failed, becoming increasingly thin at the edges, and then at the center, spreading outward into the air of the room, and then through the stone of the walls, and then into the wider air of Mordor, and then further, diffusing across the atmosphere of Middle-earth with the gradual and irresistible dispersal of something that has lost the organizing principle. That was holding it together. He becomes, as Tolkien understood such dissipations, a cry without a mouth, a direction without a will to maintain it, a quality of the world's air that has no specific location and no specific character and no capacity for choice, which is the precise thing that distinguishes a dispersed spirit from a living one, not the presence or absence of existence, but the presence or absence of the capacity to choose. He is not dead. He is, in the technical theology of the legendarium, simply elsewhere, spread so thin across the world that the concept of aware no longer applies to him in any meaningful sense. The inner chamber of Barad Dar is a room with no windows. In the silence after, and it is genuinely silent now. The particular silence of a space that has been occupied by a very large presence for a very long time and is now learning what it feels like to contain only itself. She stands in the doorway for a moment longer. She does not mark the moment, she does not speak, she does not need to do either of these things, because the moment does not require marking and she does not require the marking of it. She is not someone who requires ceremony for her own benefit. She turns and walks back through the corridors of the now empty tower, and the flowers outside are still blooming on the stone, and the army of the west is still on the plain below, and the suspended orcs are still, and the sky above Mordor is already, fractionally, lighter. Not from any deliberate act of hers, but from the simple physical consequence of Sauron's ambient darkening. maintained for 3 ages by a will that is no longer present to maintain it, beginning to lift. The most devastating thing that can happen to the father of lies is accurate observation. She emerges from the tower's gate into the morning, and behind her, for the first time in the memory of anything living, Barad Doctor casts no shadow. Time passes. This is the first thing to understand about the world Galadriel has made. Time passes, but it does not accumulate the way it used to. In the old world, the world before the Glade, before the ring, before the February night when a hobbit held out his hand and she reached across the air and changed everything, time had a specific quality of accrual. Each year added itself to the previous ones, and the sum was visible, in the gray that came into a man's hair, in the way a tree's trunk widened, in the particular weathering of stone that has been standing in the rain for long enough to show it. Time was legible. You could read the world and know how old it was. The world Galadriel has made is not legible in this way. The fields of the Pelennor are green. They are the specific green of late summer growth, full and unharvested, looking even after the harvest. The same green on the first day of autumn and the last. The grain does not ripen unevenly. It does not develop the particular stress patterns that weather and soil variation and the specific history of each plot produce in ordinary crops. It is uniform in the way that a painting of a field is uniform, entirely correct in the individual detail, slightly wrong in the aggregate. In the way that something produced by a single intention is always slightly wrong in the aggregate, because the world it is imitating was produced by 10,000 competing intentions, and their aggregate is the opposite of uniformity. No one goes hungry. This is a fact, stated plainly, because it is plain, in every region where the ring's preservation field has extended, and it has extended. In the months since Mordor, across Gondor and Rohan and Eriador and the lands beyond, the harvest is perfect, every year. The same harvest, in the same abundance, with the same distribution of produce across the same geography. Farmers who have spent their lives learning to read soil and weather and the particular temperament of a given plot have nothing left to read. The soil does what it does now. The weather falls where it falls. The crop grows as it grows. There is nothing to interpret, because interpretation is the instrument of a system that can vary, and the system no longer varies. No one dies of illness. Bodies held in the ring's ambient preservation field maintain themselves with the same principle that maintains Lothlorien's trees. The cellular processes that produce decay are simply not available to them. A man who contracts the river fever in the Anduin Delta finds it stops progressing on the first night and is gone by the third morning, the infection having found no purchase in tissue that has been, without his awareness or consent, made inhospitable to the mechanism of its own destruction. He recovers. He does not think to question the recovery, because recovery is what people prefer, and preferences rarely interrogate their own fulfillment. No one dies in war. There are no wars. She ended them, not through diplomacy, not through the patient construction of treaties between parties whose interests she has balanced and whose grievances she has addressed, but through the direct and simple method of making war unavailable. The ring's reach, extended to the commanders and kings of every remaining faction in Middle-earth, shows each of them, with the clarity that it showed Saruman, the complete landscape of what armed conflict will produce in a world where she holds what she holds. The calculation is not complicated. There is no version of the arithmetic in which raising an army against the Lady of the Ring produces an outcome that the army's commander would prefer. Every king who has done the arithmetic has arrived at the same conclusion and lowered his sword and sent his levies home. This is the world Galadriel has made. It is peaceful, it is full, it is beautiful and undying. It is, in every particular she intended when she reached across the air in the glade of the mirror, precisely what she meant. Now the narrator begins the inventory of what is wrong. The trees from Autumn Third Age 3019 still wear their autumn leaves. This is the fact that residents of the Shire first noticed, because hobbits are attentive to their landscape in the specific way of people whose lives are organized around growing things. The leaves turned, as they always turn, in the long gold and red of September's second half. They did not fall. October came and went, and they did not fall. November came, the month when the Shire's trees are usually bare, their branches making the particular dark tracery against gray sky that hobbits associate with the approach of the cozy indoor months, and the leaves did not fall. They are amber and gold and red, the specific colors of the last week of September 3rd Age 3019. And they will be those colors for as long as the ring's preservation extends its hold over the world's biological processes. which is to say, indefinitely, the Shire looks, to a visitor arriving for the first time, unbelievably beautiful. The perpetual autumn gold of every tree, the full fields, the immaculate hedgerows. It looks like the Shire at its best moment, held at its best moment, available always in the specific perfection of its best moment. Visitors from Gondor, coming north for the first time since the war did not happen, stand on the hill above Hobbiton and breathe the clean air and find the word idyllic insufficient and cannot find a better one. The hobbits who live there have stopped mentioning the leaves. They noticed. They discussed it, at first in the thorough and comfortable way that hobbits discuss things in their inns and gardens and at their gates in the evening. The leaves not falling had the potential to be an interesting topic for weeks, the kind of thing that gets worked through from every angle and settled into comfortable community knowledge. But the settling did not happen, because each angle of the discussion eventually arrived at the same place. The leaves not falling was the ring's doing, and the ring was the lady's doing. And the lady had saved them all, and they were grateful, and the harvest was extraordinary, and perhaps there was something comfortable about a world that stayed at its best moment. The discussion, arriving repeatedly at this place, simply stopped, not resolved. Stopped, the children are small. This is the second fact, and it arrives in the community's awareness more slowly than the leaves, because children grow slowly, and the failure to grow slowly is not immediately visible as failure. The boy who was 8 years old in February 3rd, age 3019, is 8 years old in autumn. He is 8 years old the following spring. He is, 2 years after the ring was claimed, still 8 years old. The same height, the same tooth gap from the lower left incisor he lost and that has not been replaced. The same handwriting in his letters at the Hobbiton school. He is thinking 8-year-old thoughts. He remembers being 7. He is healthy and comfortable and fed and safe, and entirely unable to become 9. He has not asked about this. He does not have the language for what he has lost, because the language for a thing you have never had is the language of absence, and absence is only legible in contrast to presence, and he has not yet been 9 and so cannot register that not being 9 is a condition rather than simply a state. His mother has asked. She asked the local representative of the ladies' administrative arrangement in Hobbiton, a gentle and unhurried elf woman of the Galadriel who keeps an office near the mill and who is unfailingly kind, and who answers questions with the patient completeness of someone who has been given very good answers to work with. The elf woman explained that the preservation field, which has given the Shire its extraordinary harvests and ended illness and made the hedgerows the most beautiful in living memory, necessarily operates on all biological processes equally. Growth is a biological process. The field does not distinguish between the growth that produces decay and the growth that produces children becoming themselves. Both are held. When will it stop? Asked the boy's mother. The lady's wisdom in these matters is greater than mine to explain, said the elf woman, and smiled with the warmth of someone who genuinely wishes they had a better answer. The mother walked home. The boy was in the garden, doing what 8-year-olds do in gardens, methodically, cheerfully destroying something to find out what it is made of. She watched him for a while from the gate, and then went inside and sat at the kitchen table and did not do anything for a long time. There is a third fact. It has not reached Galadriel yet. It is traveling toward her slowly through the administrative channels of her arrangement, passed between the Galadriel representatives in their various territories and the coordination center in the rebuilt Minas Tirith, moving up through the levels of her distributed attention the way water moves up through root systems, against the grain of its own weight, drawn by a differential that the system creates. It is moving slowly because the people who first encountered it did not know what category to put it in. It is not illness. It is not starvation. It is not war. The categories available to the administrative system are the categories of the things the ring's preservation was designed to prevent, and this does not fit any of them. On the Pelennor fields, in the weeks before Galadriel arrived from the north, there were men who fell in the fighting at Osgiliath's eastern crossing. Soldiers of Gondor, holding the ford against the advance pressure of Mordor's forces in the days when the war was still approaching rather than ended. Several of them were mortally wounded, spear thrust to the lung, sword to the abdomen. The specific category of wound that the surgeons of the houses of healing, in their long and careful taxonomy of damage, file under wounds from which men do not recover. They have not died. The ring's preservation field reached them when Galadriel entered Minas Tirith, and it did what the ring's preservation field does. It held. It held the wounds at their moment of maximum damage, the tissue disrupted, the blood present where blood should not be, the organ compromised in its function, and it held the men at the moment of sustaining them. They breathe, in and out, at the rhythm of their wounding. They feel what they felt at the moment of the wound, and nothing subsequent. Because subsequent requires time's movement, and time does not move inside the preservation field. They are conscious. They are aware. They experience, continuously and without the relief that unconsciousness would provide, the precise sensation of the worst moment of their lives. They cannot die. In a farmhouse east of Minas Tirith, appropriated as a temporary aid station in the confused days before the war did not happen, a young soldier of Gondor lies on a cot with a spear wound through his left lung. The surgeons who found him have been sending reports up through the administrative system for 6 months. The reports arrive and are catalogued with the patient efficiency of a well-run archive. They have not yet reached a level of the system where someone has the authority to bring them to the lady's attention. He breathes, in and out. The light through the farmhouse window is the light of a perfect autumn afternoon, amber and gold, the same light it has been since February. It will be this light tomorrow. It will be this light in a year, and in 10 years, and in 100. He does not know this. He knows only the breath. In and out, in and out, in and out. East of Minas Tirith, on the slopes of Mount Doom above the flowering plain of Gorgoroth, a white asphodel blooms in the ash. The ash is clean now. The volcanic activity of Orod Ruin has been preserved at the level it occupied in February 3rd, age 3019, which was low. The mountain dormant between its active periods. The flower grows from a crack in the rock with the same patient authority as the flowers on Barad-dûr's foundation, drawing on moisture that moves through the volcanic stone from deep sources, producing its white petals in the ash-clean air of a Mordor that smells, faintly but unmistakably, of growing things. In the high chamber of Minas Tirith, Galadriel sits on the throne of light and glass that has replaced the steward's carved chair and looks east through the ring's sight across the full breadth of her domain. She sees the fields, full and perfect. She sees the cities, undamaged and clean. She sees the roads busy with the commerce of a country that is not spending its resources on war. She sees Mordor, white-flowered and still. She sees the 9 standing on the Pelennor in their 9 positions, motionless, permanent, awaiting her further consideration. She sees Saruman in Orthanc, bent over a manuscript, the lamp burning beside him, the work proceeding. She sees Aragorn in his council chamber, governing with the attentiveness of a king who takes his responsibilities seriously and does not waste the position he has been given. She sees a world at peace. She looks east, where the horizon above the former Mordor has been clean for months, the ash pall gone, the poisoned sky clear for the first time in the memory of anyone living. It is a beautiful horizon, still and perfect and carrying the specific quality of permanence that the ring's preservation gives to everything it touches, not the peace of a thing that has found resolution, but the peace of a thing that has been fixed at its most resolved moment and will not be permitted to depart from it. She does not yet see the farmhouse east of the city. She does not see the cot, the window, the amber light that does not change. She does not hear the breathing. She looks at her perfect horizon and it is beautiful and complete. And from the slopes of Mount Doom, the white flower sways in a wind that smells of nothing but growing things, and somewhere in the administrative system, moving slowly upward through the layers of her arrangement, a report is traveling toward her that she has not yet read. In and out, in and out. The council chamber in Minas Tirith has been reorganized. Not dramatically, the room is still the room it has always been, the long stone table still running the length of it, the windows still facing east and south over the city's lower circles toward the Pelennor and the Anduin beyond. The maps are still on the walls, though the markings on them have changed. The red notations of enemy positions and force movements are gone, replaced by the blue and green of administrative divisions and the precise cartography of the ring's preservation field as it is extended across the territory she governs. The room is, in its physical facts, still a council chamber. What has changed is the function of the meetings held within it, and the function has changed because the nature of the problems brought to it has changed. There are no military emergencies. There are no siege preparations, no arguments about troop deployment, no difficult communications from field commanders requiring the kind of rapid decision-making under incomplete information that has been the primary intellectual demand of governance in this room for as long as Gondor has existed as a thing requiring governing. The problems that come to this table now are the problems of administration in a world that has stopped producing military emergencies, logistics, resource distribution, the management of trade relationships between regions whose historical agreements were premised on conditions that the ring's transformation of the world has made obsolete. They are, by any measure available to the men sitting around this table, considerably smaller problems than the ones the room was designed for. Aragorn sits at the table's head. Beside him, in the specific arrangement that has developed organically over the months since Minas Tirith's reorganization, not assigned, simply settled into through the accumulated habit of who arrives first and where they find it natural to position themselves, are Boromir, Faramir, who has returned from Ithilien thin and quiet and observant in the way of a man who has been doing a great deal of private thinking, Imrahil of Dol Amroth, and 3 representatives of the Galadrim whose names the men of Gondor have learned and whose presence at the council table has acquired, in the months of its continuity, the quality of an established fact rather than an imposition. Galadriel is not present. She is never present at these meetings. She does not need to be. The delegation from Rain arrived 2 days before the council convenes to discuss it. 3 men, travel-worn, carrying the specific bearing of representatives who have been given clear instructions and are determined to execute them with dignity, despite the uncertainty of their reception. Their king, a man named in their Eastern tongue with a title that the Gondorian interpreters render approximately as the keeper of the seasonal fire, has sent them with a precise and carefully composed request. The eastern grasslands of Rain have been farmed by their method for 43 generations. The method requires controlled burns. Fire set deliberately in the dry season to clear the accumulated thatch of the previous year's growth, to return its nutrients to the soil, to reset the biological clock of a grassland ecosystem that has evolved, across millennia, in relationship with fire as a recurring condition rather than a catastrophic exception. Without the burns, the thatch accumulates. The soil beneath it compacts. The water does not penetrate. The root systems of the grasses, denied the periodic renewal that fire provides, grow shallow and brittle and fail. The grassland does not die immediately. It takes years, in the ordinary course of ecological succession, for the failure to become visible at the surface. But it fails. 43 generations of farmers have learned to read the stages of this failure the way sailors learn to read weather, because knowing it is coming and knowing when to burn is the foundational skill of their entire agricultural tradition. The ring's preservation field arrived in Rain 8 months ago. The fires will not catch. Not because the ring prevents fire specifically. Fire is not excluded from the world Galadriel has made. What the preservation field prevents is change, and a controlled burn is, at its most precise definition, deliberate change, the acceleration of a biological cycle that the field has fixed at a particular point. The thatch that was present in February 3rd, age 3019, is the thatch that will be present until she chooses otherwise. The burns the farmers of Rain have been setting for 43 generations find, in the preserved grassland, no purchase. The fire goes out. The thatch remains. Their land is becoming unfertile. The delegation presents this with the specific clarity of men who have prepared their case carefully and are aware that the case may not matter. Their eldest member, a man in his 60s with the particular posture of someone who has spent his life outdoors and in authority, places before the council a small leather case containing soil samples from 3 representative plots, the eastern, central, and western sections of the main agricultural plain. He explains through the interpreter what the soil samples show, and what the samples from the same plots a generation ago showed, and what the progression between the 2 sets of data indicates for the next 5 years. He is not an educated man in the Gondorian sense. He has no formal training in soil science, no academic framework for the information he is presenting. He has 40 years of personal observation of this specific land, and the precise and detailed knowledge that 40 years of personal observation produces in a person who is paying attention. The council listens. Faramir asks 3 questions. His questions are specific and technical and reveal, in their specificity, that he has been reading the administrative reports from Rain more carefully than the brevity of his contributions to previous meetings suggested. The eldest delegate answers each question with the directness of a man who knows exactly what he knows and does not perform uncertainty about things he is certain of. At the end of the session, the delegation is given comfortable quarters in the second circle and told that the council will respond within the week. The response comes from above the council. She has read the delegation's materials, the soil samples, the agricultural data, the interpreter's transcript of the eldest delegate's testimony, through the ring's site, which gives her access to the council's records without requiring her to be present at the council's proceedings. She has considered the situation with the full weight of a mind that has been thinking about agriculture, in one context or another, since the first age of the world. She has arrived at a solution. The solution is presented to Aragorn in the form of a written document, 12 pages. In her precise hand, delivered to his private study by a Galadriel attendant in the early morning before the council reconvenes. The document describes, in complete and meticulous detail, an alternative agricultural method developed from Noldorian practice in the years before the First Age ended and Beleriand drowned, a method designed for grassland environments of exactly the soil composition and rainfall pattern that Ren presents, requiring no fire, producing equivalent or superior yields when properly implemented, fully compatible with the preservation field's operating parameters. The method works. Aragorn reads it with Faramir at his shoulder, both of them following the technical detail with the concentration it requires, and the conclusion they reach independently and simultaneously is the same. It works. The yields the document projects are not speculative. They are drawn from the documented results of First Age Noldorian agricultural records that she has access to, and the men of Gondor do not, records from a time before the records of men began, and the methodology is sound, and the projections are conservative. The delegation from Rain receives the document the following morning. The interpreter requires 4 hours to produce a working translation. The eldest delegate reads it once, then reads it again, then sits for a time with his hands on the table and the document before him and says nothing. Then he says, in his own language, something that the interpreter translates with the careful neutrality of someone transmitting a meaning they are not responsible for, "This will feed us." A pause. This will not be us feeding ourselves. The distinction takes 3 minutes to convey adequately across the language gap, and when it has been conveyed, there is a silence in the room of the kind that assembles itself when something has been said that everyone present understands to be important, and no one has an immediate response to. The delegation departs the next day. They carry the document. They will implement its method. They have no mechanism to refuse, not because she has compelled them directly, not because there is a threat attached to the alternative, but because the alternative is the slow failure of their land, and the document is the solution to the slow failure of their land, and the logic of the situation does not leave room for a third option. 43 generations of accumulated knowledge about how to live in relationship with the land that sustains you. The specific skill of reading the thatch, the tradition of the seasonal fire, the ceremonies that surround it, the social structures organized around its timing, the identity of a people who understand themselves as keepers of the fire rather than suppressors of it. These things will not survive the implementation of the Noldorian method, because the Noldorian method does not require them, and the generation that grows up practicing the Noldorian method will have no use for the knowledge their grandparents carried, and knowledge without use does not persist. She did not destroy their tradition. She offered them an alternative. They accepted the alternative. They accepted it freely, in the sense that no one held a sword to them. They had no argument against it and no option beyond it, but these are not the same as compulsion, and the distinction between them is real even as it is, in the situation the delegation finds itself in, functionally irrelevant. That night, in the private chamber he shares with Arwen, Aragorn lies on his back and looks at the ceiling. Arwen is beside him, awake. She has been awake more than she sleeps now, her body preserved in its wakefulness by the same field that preserves everything else. The rhythms of rest that her body knew no longer operating on the schedule they knew. She does not complain of this. She does not complain of anything. She has accommodated what is with the grace that several thousand years of life have given her for accommodation. She was right, said Aragorn. Arwen does not ask him to clarify what he means. She knows what he means. She has been knowing what he means for several months, in the private and continuous way of a person thinking about something they have not yet found the words for. The method works. The people will be fed. She was right. The ceiling of the private chamber is carved stone, the work of craftsmen of the Third Age who were working in a tradition that reached back through the Second Age and into the First, a tradition of ornamental stonework that expresses, in its specific vocabulary of leaf and wave and geometric interlace, the aesthetic convictions of a people across many centuries of their development. It is very beautiful. It will be very beautiful forever. I cannot find what she did wrong, said Aragorn. He says this with the specific quality of a man presenting evidence rather than making an argument, laying a finding before himself the way he would lay intelligence before a council. This is what the information shows. The information shows that she offered a solution to a problem. The solution works. They accepted it without compulsion. He cannot find the step in this sequence that constitutes an error. He cannot find it. He has been looking for 3 months. Aragorn, said Arwen, after a time. Yes, you know what she did wrong. He is quiet for a long moment. The ceiling does not change. The light in the room, a lamp burning at the bedside, steady and unchanged. The oil preserved at its current level without diminishing, because the field holds it there, is the same light it has been since they retired, and will be the same light in the morning. She solved it, he said. Yes, said Arwen, when it was theirs to solve. The lamp burns. The ceiling is very beautiful. Somewhere in the city below, the watch is changing at the 3rd hour. The footsteps of the outgoing guard audible briefly through the window before the night resettles into its perfect, unvarying quiet. He does not sleep for a long time. Neither does she. They lie in the preserved dark of their preserved city, under the preserved light of the preserved lamp, and they look at the ceiling, and neither of them says anything further. Because the thing they have named does not get larger or smaller by being discussed. It is the size it is. The size it is very small, a question of who solved a farming problem, and also very large in the way that foundational things are large, not impressive in themselves but structural, the thing everything else is built on, invisible until you look directly at it, impossible to ignore once you have. In the morning the administration will resume, the council will meet, the reports will arrive, the ring's domain will be peaceful and fed and undying, and there will be problems to address. And she will address them with the complete intelligence and genuine care that she has brought to every problem since February 3rd, age 3019. She will solve them. She is never wrong. That is the complete and total and inescapable horror of the thing that Aragorn has spent 3 months not finding the language for, lying in the dark above a city she has made perfect, beside a woman whose rest she has made impossible, in a world from which the option to solve your own problems has been, with the best intentions and the most accurate intelligence available to any mind in Middle-earth, quietly and permanently removed. She is never wrong. He cannot find what she did wrong. This is not a comfort. The sea longing does not diminish with time. This is the fact that the elves of Middle-earth have carried across the Third Age with the patient stoicism of a people who have learned, through centuries of practice, to hold grief at a distance sufficient to function. The longing for Valinor is present always, in the background of every other experience, the way a sustained note is present beneath more varied music. You learn to hear it without attending to it. You learn to conduct your life in the foreground while the note continues in the background. The elves have been doing this since the Second Age, since the shores of Beleriand drowned and the path west became the only path remaining toward the home they had left and always meant to return to. Under the ring's preservation field, the note does not fade. This is what Galadriel did not anticipate, or rather what she anticipated in theory and has encountered in practice as a different and more specific thing than theory prepared her for. The bodies of the elves are preserved. Their fading has been arrested, the gradual thinning of elvish presence in the world, the process by which their physical forms were becoming too insubstantial for Middle-earth's changed nature to accommodate, has stopped. They are entirely here, entirely embodied, entirely present in the world in the same degree they were present in February 3rd, age 3019. But the call from Valinor has not stopped. The sea longing is not a property of elvish bodies. It is a property of elvish souls, the part of them that is not biological, not physical, not subject to the ring's preservation in the same way that tissue and bone are subject to it. The soul hears the West calling with the same urgency it has always heard it. The body remains entirely present and entirely unable to answer. The result is not the comfortable background note that the elves of Middle-earth have learned to live alongside. The result is a frequency that the body cannot escape and cannot respond to, sustained at the intensity of the moment of arrival and not permitted to resolve. Elrond of Rivendell arrives in Minas Tirith without announcement. He comes alone, no escort, no formal delegation, none of the ceremonial trappings that his position as Lord of Imladris would ordinarily require for a journey of this significance. He rides through the gates of the city on a gray horse in the early morning and goes directly to the tower where she keeps her court. And the Galadrim at the tower's entrance admit him without hesitation, because he is Elrond, and admission is not a question that arises. She receives him in the garden on the tower's upper level, an open space of white stone and growing things, flowers she has cultivated from Lorraine stock, the same varieties that bloom on Barad Doctor's foundations now blooming here in the still air above Minas Tirith. The morning is clear. The horizon east of the city is clean. The sky above former Mordor carrying the specific quality of an atmosphere that has been recovering from 3 ages of contamination and has had 8 months to show what recovery looks like. It is almost blue in the east now, not quite. Almost, Elrond stands in the garden entrance and looks at her across the white stones. He is not the Elrond of the Third Age's long autumn, the figure of contained and dignified grief that Middle-earth has known for 3,000 years. The Lord who governs his hidden valley with meticulous competence and reads the movements of the world through the lens of someone who has watched everything he builds eventually fall. He looks older than that Elrond in some way that has nothing to do with his face, which has not changed. The thing that looks older is something that does not have a surface. It is in the quality of his stillness, the specific weight of how he occupies the garden entrance, as though standing requires a degree of conscious effort it did not previously require. He has not slept adequately in 8 months. This is visible in the way that inadequate sleep is visible in beings whose bodies do not show fatigue in the ordinary manner, not in the face, not in the posture, but in the economy of the eyes, the narrowing of attention to what is immediately necessary, the absence of the peripheral interest that a rested mind maintains automatically. "Galadriel," he said, "not my lady. Her name." She looks at him across the garden. She has been expecting this visit. Not today specifically, the ring gives her reach across vast distances but not precise prediction of individual choices, which retain a degree of genuine contingency even within the preservation field's influence. She has known that he would come, in the same way she has known since the morning after the Glade, all the things that follow as logical consequences from the thing she chose. She has simply been waiting for the consequences to arrive in their own sequence, addressing each as it comes. "Come and sit," she said. "I will say what I have come to say standing," said Elrond. And there was in his voice the specific quality of a man who has decided on his phrasing in advance and will not be redirected by hospitality into something more comfortable and less honest. She waits. "I am asking you to release us," said Elrond. "I am not making a political case. I am not presenting a strategic argument. I am telling you what is true. The sea longing is not bearable at this intensity for this duration, and the duration has no visible end, and I am asking you, as someone who has known me since the first age and who I am asking you to open the havens." The phrasing matters and she hears it precisely. He is not demanding. He is not threatening. He is not deploying the authority of his 3,000 years of service or the weight of his position or the argument of reciprocal obligation. He is asking. Plainly, without armature, in the register of one person saying a true thing to another person and trusting the truth to be sufficient. She considers him for a moment with the ring's clear sight, which shows her not what she wants to see, but what is there, and what is there in Elrond's face this morning is not ambiguous. The grief is structural. It is load-bearing. He has been holding it in the careful way he has held everything across the Third Age's long patience, and the careful way has reached its limit. Not through any failure of his will, but through the simple arithmetic of a sustainable load applied for too long at too great an intensity. "Sit," she said again. He sits. Not because she has compelled him, and not because the hospitality has softened his position, because the standing cost him something he could not spare, and the sitting does not cost him what the standing did, and he is not going to spend himself on gesture when he has come here to spend himself on truth. She pours water from the stone pitcher on the table, sets the cup before him. He does not drink. "Tell me," she said, "what you believe I should do differently." "I have told you," said Elrond. "Tell me what you believe the consequence would be," she said, "if I opened the havens, if I removed the preservation field from the Grey Havens and permitted the ships to sail. What do you believe would follow?" He is quiet for a moment. He knows this approach. It is the approach of a great mind inviting a lesser mind to demonstrate the gap between them, to show through its own words that it has not accounted for what the greater mind has accounted for. He has used this approach himself, in the long councils of Rivendell across the Third Age, with lords of men who arrived certain of their positions and left uncertain. He recognizes it. He does not use the recognition as a reason to refuse the question, because the alternative is silence, and silence concedes the field. The elves who can endure would sail west, he said. Those who cannot endure here under these conditions would sail west. Over years, over decades, the elvish presence in Middle-earth would diminish. Not through the fading that the ring has arrested, but through voluntary departure. Middle-earth would become, in time, a world of men, as it was always intended to become. Yes, she said. And that would be, said Elrond, and the next word cost him something. Correct. She looks at him. She does not look away. The ring's clear sight shows her the exact nature of what that word cost him. The specific weight of a 3,000-year-old grief acknowledging the rightness of its own resolution, and she does not look away from it. If I open the haven, she said, I leave Middle-earth without the Calakendi, without Vilya and what Vilya maintains, without the knowledge of the First Age that has no repository elsewhere, without the council of beings whose perspective encompasses the full length of the world's history. I leave it in the keeping of beings whose longest life spans 3 centuries, and whose access to what those centuries have produced is already incomplete. I leave it diminished. You leave it free, said Elrond. The garden is quiet, the white flowers do not move. The air above the city is still. I leave it to make its own errors, she said. I leave it to the wars that will resume when there is no longer a force sufficient to make war unprofitable. I leave it to the plagues that will return when the preservation field is no longer present to prevent them. I leave it to the famines, the droughts, the accumulated consequences of mortal governance over long centuries. I leave it to its own nature. Yes, and its nature will kill people. Yes, said Elrond, people who did not choose to be killed. Yes, she looks at the eastern horizon. Almost blue. The light is very clean above former Mordor this morning, the clearest it has been since the preservation field began to work on the atmosphere. I cannot open the havens, she said. It is not a refusal in the sense of a door closed against pressure. It is a statement of the things she believes, stated without decoration. I will not leave Middle-earth to its nature. I have seen what its nature produces. I have watched Beleriand drown and Eregion burn and the Last Alliance spend 20,000 lives to produce a peace that lasted 500 years before it unraveled again. Its nature produces suffering of a scale and duration that the people suffering it did not consent to and could not prevent. I will not restore the conditions that produce it. You have removed the conditions that allow them to prevent it themselves, said Elrond. She does not answer this. Not because she has no answer, she has the answer she gave Aragorn. The answer she gives every variation of this argument, the answer that is internally consistent and which she has examined from every available angle and found to hold. She does not give it because Elrond already knows it, and giving it again does not change what it costs him to hear it, and she is not without the knowledge of what this conversation costs him. She says, instead, I am sorry. And she means it. This is perhaps the most important sentence of the chapter, and it must be held with care. She means it completely. The apology is genuine. The grief at what it costs him is real, present in her in the same way the ring's clarity is present. She cannot turn it off, cannot unsee what the sight shows her. She sees his grief, and she is sorry for it, and she will not open the havens. Both of these things are true simultaneously. He stands, he sets the cup of water down, he never drank from it, and he looks at her across the white stone table in the garden above Minas Tirith, and what is in his face is not anger. It is not even, precisely, despair. It is the expression of a man who has arrived at the final point of a very long journey and found that the thing at the end of it is not what he came for and cannot be made to be what he came for. He bows, formal, complete, the bow of a lord to a greater lord, not withheld, not reluctant. He was raised in a culture where courtesy is not the suppression of truth, but a parallel form of it, and what the bow conveys is true. She is what she is. He knows what she is. He does not pretend otherwise. Then he leaves the garden. His footsteps on the stone stairs below are audible for a few seconds, then not. She sits with the untouched cup of water before her and looks east. Gandalf does not come in person. He sends a letter. This is itself the communication. The choice to write rather than to appear is Gandalf saying, in the language of gesture, what he has calculated a personal audience would not achieve. She reads it the morning after Elrond departs. It is 2 pages in his compressed hand. The handwriting of a man who has a great deal to say and has been editing himself. The letter is a theological argument. This is characteristic. Gandalf, who has been everything from a vagrant with a cart of fireworks to the commander of the defense of Minas Tirith, is at his foundation a mind that thinks in first principles. And the first principle he reaches for is the one that Tolkien's legendarium holds at its center: free will as the supreme gift, the one thing that separates the created from the merely made, the one thing that Morgoth and Sauron both attacked, and that their attack constituted the fundamental nature of their evil. He does not accuse her directly. The letter does not contain the word evil. It contains instead a sequence of precisely chosen statements about the nature of dominion and the nature of care, and the specific point at which one becomes the other, stated as philosophy, argued as theology, making the case with the same care that Gandalf has brought to every important case across the 500 years of his mission in Middle-earth. The letter's final paragraph asks one question, plainly: is the world better for being saved without its consent than it would be for being lost with it? He has signed it with the name Círdan gave him when he arrived at the Grey Havens at the beginning of the Third Age: Mithrandir, the Grey Pilgrim, the name of someone whose role is movement, whose entire identity is the capacity to go where he is needed and leave when his purpose is complete. She reads the letter twice. She sets it on the table. She picks it up and reads the final paragraph a third time. She sets it down. She writes her reply on a single page. The reply addresses each of the letter's theological points with the precision of a scholar who has thought about these questions for 3,000 years and has reached conclusions she finds stable. The reply's final sentence answers his question: the world is better for existing than for being lost, and I am the condition of its existing. She folds it and gives it to a Galadriel attendant for delivery. Then she goes to the Palantir and looks through it at the Grey Havens. Círdan's harbor at Mithlond, the long inlet of the Gulf of Lynn, the stone quays where ships have been built and launched across the entirety of the Third Age, and before, the grey water and the grey sky above it, and the specific quality of light on the western sea that is different from the light anywhere else in Middle-earth, as though even the light on that water is trying to reach toward what lies beyond the horizon. The ships are there. 6 of them, large enough for the voyage west, built across the decades with the patient craft of the greatest shipwright remaining in Middle-earth. Their sails are furled. Their rigging is taut. They move very slightly on the water with the small perpetual motion of things designed to cross oceans, things that know their purpose and are waiting. They do not sail. She does not remove the preservation field from the harbor. She does not close the harbor with any active mechanism. There is no gate, no wall, no force explicitly preventing departure. The ships simply exist within the field, as everything exists within the field, held at the moment she chose, the moment before everything ends, preserved there, permanent and patient and entirely unable to move forward into what comes next. The water laps at the stone quays. The sails are furled. The rigging does not fray. The hulls do not take on water or growth or the slow damage of salt and time. They are perfect ships. They are perfect ships that will never sail. Somewhere on the quay, a figure stands and looks west across the water. Círdan the shipwright, who has been building departure vessels for departing elves since the Second Age, who has understood his role for so long that it has become indistinguishable from his nature. I am the one who remains, so that others may leave, stands on the stone quay of his harbor, and looks at the horizon. The horizon does not change. He has been standing in this position, or variations of it, for 8 months. He will stand in it tomorrow. The wind off the water carries the smell of the open sea, cold, salt, enormous, and underneath the smell, for those with the perception to catch it, something else, the specific quality of air that has traveled from very far west and carries in it the faintest trace of what it passed through to arrive here. He breathes it in. He cannot go toward it. He breathes it in again. In his tower in Minas Tirith, Gandalf reads her reply. He reads it once. He sets it on the desk beside the lamp. He picks up his pipe, the old short pipe, the one he has had since before the Third Age had a name, the one the Shire's best leaf has filled across 500 years of a mission that is now, formally speaking, complete. He fills it. He lights it. He draws once, and the smoke rises in the still air of the tower room, pale and thin, and does not disperse the way smoke disperses in a room where the air is moving. It rises to the ceiling and settles there, preserved, because everything is preserved, because the air does not move in the way air moves in a world where things are still happening. He looks at it for a moment. The specific quality of his eyes in this moment is not despair. It is not resignation. It is not grief, though grief is present. It is the expression of a craftsman of the spirit, and he is, at his foundational Maya nature, a craftsman of an entirely different kind from Saruman and Sauron, who were Maiar of Oul and shaped the world with their hands. Olrin was shaped by Manhu-and-Varda and by Nenya above all others, from whom he learned pity and the patient art of kindling what is already present in another being rather than imposing a new form upon it. He did not make things. He woke them. He is their counterpart and their opposite, and he looks now at a world that does not need waking, because nothing in it is permitted to sleep. Who looks at a tool he has been using and understands, with the clarity of genuine expertise, that the tool has been made to do something the job no longer requires. Narya, the ring of fire, is on his finger. He can feel it, warm, present, entirely itself. The ring of fire, given to him by Círdan specifically to kindle the hearts of men and elves to courage in the long struggle against the shadow. The shadow is gone. There are no hearts left to kindle. The courage has been replaced by something that does not need kindling, because it does not involve choice. She has made choice unnecessary, and Narya's purpose was always the courage to choose when choice was hardest, and the hardest choice remaining in Middle-earth is the one she will not permit. The smoke settles at the ceiling of the tower room. He does not send it into rings or shapes. He simply sits with it, and looks at it, and holds the pipe loosely in his hand, and the lamp burns beside him with its preserved oil, steady and unchanged. And outside the window the city of Minas Tirith is quiet, and full, and at peace, and perfectly, permanently, irrevocably itself. The fire in Narya's setting does not go out. It simply stops being for anything. Years have passed. The exact number does not matter, and the fact that it does not matter is itself the first fact of the world Galadriel has made. In the old world, years accumulated into history, and history was the record of change, the document that proved the world had been somewhere, and was now somewhere else, and would be somewhere else again. Years had direction. They pointed forward. The accumulation of them was the evidence that something was happening, that the world was in motion, that the story was not finished. The years that have passed since February 3rd age 19 do not accumulate. They repeat. In the Shire, the girl who was 8 years old when the ring was claimed is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for long enough that the community around her has stopped marking the distinction between this year and last year in the ways communities usually mark it. The way a child's changed face marks it, the way the height notch on the doorframe marks it, the way the particular accumulation of small events that makes this year different from last year marks it. Those instruments of time's passage require time to pass. Time does not pass. It circulates, like water in a sealed vessel, present, in motion, going nowhere. She sits in her garden in the amber light that is always afternoon in the Shire now, always the amber of late September, always the specific gold of leaves that have not fallen and will not fall. She is doing what she does on most afternoons, reading. She is a good reader for her age, which is 8, which it will always be. She has read every book available to an 8-year-old in the Hobbiton Lending Library. She has begun reading books intended for older readers, because the books intended for her age have been exhausted. She reads them with the patience of a person who has accepted their situation and is working within it. She does not ask about the leaves anymore. Sam Gamgee tends his garden at Bag End with the same attention he has brought to it across the years that do not accumulate. The Rayan earth has done what Galadriel said it would do. The sheer blooms with a fullness and variety that no garden in living memory has approached. The flowers more various, the vegetables more abundant. The hedgerows so perfectly themselves that visitors from elsewhere stand at the lane's edge and cannot find the word for what they are seeing. The garden is, by any measure available to the craft of gardening, magnificent. Sam tends it with the same hands and the same eye and the same knowledge he brought to it in February 3rd age 3019. Because those are the hands and the eye and the knowledge the preservation field found him with and has held him at. He knows everything about this garden that he knew then. He will know exactly this much about it forever. He has not learned anything new about growing things in the years that do not accumulate, because learning requires the experience of consequence, the thing you tried, and what it did, and what you adjusted, and what that did, and consequence requires time's movement, and time does not move. In the evenings, when the light is at its amber best and the garden is at the specific fullness that the preservation field holds it at, he stands at the hill's edge. He faces west. He cannot see the sea from Bag End, the distance is too great. The land between two full of things, but he stands facing it anyway, in the way that men face things they cannot see, because facing is what they have when seeing is not available. He stands there for a long time, in the preserved warmth of the preserved evening, and his face has the quality of a person listening for something just below the threshold of audibility. He has never told anyone what he listens for. He suspects they would not need to be told. In Minas Tirith, Gandalf is in his tower. He is always in his tower now, not from confinement, not from any directive she has issued regarding his movements, but from the simple logic of a being whose purpose was motion, and who has, in a world where motion has been made unnecessary, defaulted to stillness. He keeps his books. He speaks with the students who come to learn from him, and he is kind to them, genuinely, unhurriedly kind, with the patience of someone who has stopped measuring time and goals and now measures it only in the quality of the present moment. He has very good conversations. He makes people feel that they have been seen and taken seriously. He still has his pipe. What he does not do is try. The specific quality of not trying is visible only to those who knew him before, who carry in their memory the precise character of the fire that used to be in him, the urgency, the angle, the particular energy of a mind that is always 3 steps ahead of the conversation, because it is always moving towards something. That mind is still present. The intelligence has not diminished. The care is undiminished. What is gone is the direction, the forward lean of a being whose gift was always the waking of other fires, who now moves through a world where every fire has been set at its brightest and sealed there, and has nowhere to direct the light. The future exists. It is identical to the present. It will always be identical to the present. Narya is on his finger, warm, present, entirely faithful to what it is. It has nothing to kindle. In the throne room of Minas Tirith, rebuilt in the years after her arrival, the carved stone of the stewards replaced with glass and white quartz, the room catching and dispersing morning light in a way that makes it, at the first hour, almost too bright to enter without adjusting, Galadriel sits. She sits as she has sat on every morning since the throne was made, entirely still, with her hands open in her lap, looking east through the ring's sight across the full breadth of the world she governs. She attends to all of it. Every field, every city, every road and river and coastline within the preservation field's reach registers to her awareness, with the same clarity it has always registered. The ring does not tire. And she does not tire. And the attention she brings to the world this morning is identical in its quality to the attention she brought to it on the first morning after Mordor. She sees Aragorn in his council chamber, governing with the conscientious care of a man who takes his responsibilities seriously and does not waste the position he has been given. She sees Faramir and Ithilien walking the white-flowered hills in the early morning with the specific quality of a man who has found, in the beauty of his domain, something that looks like contentment from the outside and feels, from the inside, like a very comfortable room with no windows. She sees the 9 on the Pelennor, still in their 9 positions, patient as stone, awaiting her consideration. She sees Saruman in Orthanc, bent over his archive in the lamplight, the work proceeding. She sees the girl in the Shire, reading in the amber afternoon. She sees Sam at the hill's edge, facing west. She sees the soldier in the farmhouse east of the city. She found his report 14 months after it was first sent, when it had worked its way up through the administrative system far enough to reach her. She read it. She considered it for a long time, with the full weight of her intelligence and her genuine care. She has not yet resolved what to do about him. The options available to her are not simple, and she does not act on things that are not simple without first being certain, and she is not yet certain. He breathes. She will resolve it when she is certain. In and out. The morning light in the throne room shifts as the sun clears the eastern wall. The glass catches it and throws it across the floor in a pattern that is the same pattern it throws every morning. Because the morning is the same morning, and the light falls the same way, and the floor receives it the same way. It is very beautiful. It will be very beautiful tomorrow, and in 10 years, and in 100. She has not laughed in 3 years. This is not a symptom she has identified as a symptom. She is not unhappy. She has examined the question with the same precision she brings to every question, and the examination returns the same answer each time. She is not unhappy. She is complete. The world she intended to make is the world she has made. Every decision she has made since the Glade has been the correct decision, arrived at through sound reasoning from accurate premises, and the outcomes have confirmed this. She is not unhappy. She is not suffering. She is not troubled by doubt, because doubt requires the possibility that she is wrong, and she is checked and she is not wrong. She is finished. And finishing, she has discovered, in the long morning since the last piece of the world settled into its permanent form, is a room with no doors. Not a small room, the room is vast, high-ceilinged, filled with light. Everything she has made is in it. Everything she preserved is in it. Every person she saved from every death that the old world's nature would have dealt them is in it. Alive and whole and ungrieving. The room is exactly as large as the world, and exactly as beautiful, and exactly as permanent, and there is nowhere in it to go that she has not already been. She sits in the light of the throne room and she looks east, where the sky above former Mordor is almost entirely blue now, the last of the ash-taint clearing from an atmosphere that has had years of clean air to work with. It will be entirely blue by spring. The same blue, every spring, permanently. A white flower on the slopes of Mount Doom sways in a wind that smells of nothing but growing things. She looks at it through the ring's reach, that single flower, small and white and permanent, growing from the crack in the rock above the plain of Gorgoroth, with the same patience it has shown since the morning she called it there. She knows this flower. She knows every particular of it, the specific angle of its stem, the 3 petals that are slightly smaller than the others due to the asymmetry of the crack's moisture distribution, the way the morning light hits it differently than the afternoon light. She has been watching it for years. It will be exactly this flower forever. She draws breath. In the still air of the throne room, in the morning light coming off the glass, she speaks, not to the court, which is not assembled, not to any attendant. Because she is alone in the way that those who govern everything are always alone, she speaks in a voice barely above silence. In the oldest language she knows, in the language of the land where the ring's inscription was first cut into gold. By a hand that understood exactly what the words contained, Ashnaj Durbatulk, one ring to rule them all. The words do not echo in the throne room, they settle, the way things settle in preserved air, without the decay that an echo requires, without the diminishment of distance. They simply remain, present, at the same volume at which they were spoken. She is looking east when she speaks them, toward the flower, toward the almost blue sky, toward the still and ordered world that stretches from the gray havens to the far eastern plains of Rin, from the misty mountains to the shores of far Harad. Every part of it known to her, every part of it held, every part of it exactly what she has made it, and nothing more and nothing less. Now and tomorrow, and in all the tomorrows that are identical to tomorrow, preserved in the permanent amber of a love that could not stop. Outside the tower window, the city moves through its morning. The watch changes, the markets open. The children who are the age they were in February 3rd age through 19, play in the streets of the 7th Circle in the early light. No one is hungry. No one is sick. No one is afraid. Everything is fine. It always will be. The ring on her finger catches the morning light and holds it, the way it holds everything. Completely, permanently, without remainder. She won.